Thank you. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We'll go around and each person can give an opening statement. It can be as little as 1 minute, no longer than 5 minutes, about the topic, your stance. After that, we'll open up the floor. During the debate, you guys can start sending your questions in. We'll be jotting them down throughout the debate. Just tag politically provoked who your question is addressed to, and then we'll get to them during the Q&A. After the Q&A is when we'll do closing statements and final thoughts. So, who's breathing so loud?
It's probably me, speaking of asthma.
Yeah, your asthma is kicking in hard.
Pull the mic a little further away.
Okay. All right. So, why don't we get started with opening statements, and let's get started with Tom. Why don't you guys go on?
All right. I'm sorry. Okay. So, I'm here to defend systemic racism because I think that it is factually true based on the definition. As a conservative for the longest time, I thought it was debunked. I thought it wasn't true. And then as I was arguing against it, realized that some of the things that I was using to debunk systemic racism actually fell under the definition of systemic racism. When it comes to systemic racism, I don't like the name because the systems themselves they don't have racist intent. And there aren't people within the systems that have racist intent. Nobody is maliciously trying to hurt black people, but the systems carry on anyways, and they do disproportionately affect black people. So within the definition, saying that systems like business, culture, government, these sorts of systems, regardless of what the intent is for them, they're going to disproportionately affect black people in a negative way. And so when we use the word racism, I think it turns a lot of people off because they think, well, then the people within the systems are racist. And I don't believe that at all. And the definition of systemic racism doesn't say that in any way. So for the most part, I just want to argue that the things that we call systemic racism fit within the definition, even if there aren't people who are explicitly racist.
All right, so let's go to Rob next.
Yeah, so the problem is going to be the definition. So we don't really have outlined exactly what like a prompt is for the debate. So the debate is just systemic racism. So it's going to be in how we define this. So, for example, we understand, I think we can agree on what racism is, though you never know with the left. They're always trying to change the definition to say that only certain people could be racist. So we'll see if we go down that rabbit hole. But the real question is, what is systemic, right? Well, systems, right? It seems like an easy answer. But what are the systems that we're talking about then? Well, we have all kinds of systems. We have a political system. We have a law enforcement system. We have cultural systems. We have academic systems. We have entertainment systems. And so there are a litany of systems that are going on at the same time. So when we talk about systemic racism, are we saying that all of those systems are racist or part of them are racist? And here's where the problem becomes. Yes, systemic racism to some extent does exist. Let me give you some examples. We have clearly defined systemic racism against Asian Americans in the form of Ivy League schools that disproportionately punish Asian Americans and to a lesser extent white people because they feel that they want equity or equal portions. And you heard Tom say that in his opening statement. He said it's not the intent, it's that there's a disproportionate outcome. This is code for equity. And what you'll see is anytime that there is not an equal outcome, and that's different than opportunity, right? Equality of opportunity is one thing, but anytime there's not an equal outcome, people will just default to say that's bigotry, that's racism, or that's sexism if it's women. And that's not the case. The problem is, not only is that provably not the case in all these institutions, but we can see that by adopting that sort of philosophy, we're never able to get real solutions that would end up happening. Here's another form of systemic racism that we could talk about: the bigotry of low expectations that's constantly put on people of color by the left. It results in things like saying, oh, the police officers are systemically racist, which leads to movements that say things like defund the police, which in turn causes more violent crime to increase where? In the very same inner cities amongst the very same communities that they claim to be solving. If you indoctrinate generation after generation of people saying you're a perpetual victim, this country's out to get you, it doesn't matter how hard you struggle, you won't achieve. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that will then mean that those communities continue to not achieve as they elsewhere could have, as they elsewise could have. It is true that there was literal systemic racism that occurred in the past. No one will debate that to Black Americans. Certainly that's true. But by saying that everything today is responsible for that, or is based on that, we would never be able to solve that. There is no amount of reparations, no amount of retribution that could be given that would leave people on the left to say, oh, well, now it's not systemic racism because everything's been made up. This is something that they'll constantly be able to look to and say, because bad things happened in the past, it explains everything. However, we can see that many of the factors that are the most important to ensuring we have good quality of life, such as the family unit, have gotten worse since the civil rights movement. So if things like redlining and Jim Crow are the reason for these things, why is it that back in 1963 or 64, Patrick Moynihan, a Democrat, commissioned a report that said it was a national travesty that 25% of Black children was born out of wedlock, and yet after all of these programs that we see from Democrats, now that number is 75%, which is directly corollary to a lot of the problems we see. So lastly, I'll just say that if you say everything's systemically racist and everything's evidence of racism, such as Ibram Kendi and others do, then the words have no meaning whatsoever. And they literally propose that the way to solve systemic racism is racist actions that seek to have retribution. That's what so many people say. So in an effort to face systemic racism, which they just say is this amorphous, anytime there's an unequitable outcome, it's systemic racism, they're literally proposing racist solutions such as giving money to Black farmers but not poor white farmers. Oakland's giving money to poor people but not poor white people. Or the CDC recommending giving the vaccine that will lead to 6% more people dying, but it's okay, they say, because disproportionately that 6% will be white people. And so when you have this sort of mentality that everything's systemically racist, it justifies all sorts of repugnant positions where you actually advocate for literal systemic racism, such as punishing Asian Americans in Ivy League schools, fighting this never-ending boogeyman.
All right, thank you. Jangles.
Yeah, so systemic racism doesn't mean that every single disparity in every single individual comes down to race. That's really simplistic. Systemic racism is very, very multifactorial. So systems intertwine. So all a system is an interaction between actors. That's really all a system is in the broadest sense. And you can't fully separate the educational system from the criminal justice system, from the economy. You can't really separate these things neatly because they all play off one another. So when we say that America is systemically racist, it just like Tom said, it would be systemically racist even if no one individual actor within it were racist, and it's just a product of linear time. So there's the lack of accumulation of wealth for Black people, which pushed them into certain areas. We have stickiness of wealth. It takes roughly 5 to 6 generations before wealth starts to even out, before you're no longer affected by the wealth of the people who you grew up with. And on top of that, it's not this thing that old racism has perpetuated through to today, which is true to a certain extent, but it also has to do with post hoc justification. So if you believe that America is a free and just country, which is great, if you believe in colorblindness, that's awesome. And these are good qualities to have that good people try to have. But then you look at, okay, there were disparate outcomes between white people and Black people. So you start to attribute those outcomes to something that other than the environment you grew up in. All of us agree that the environment you grow up in, the system you live in, is enormously important for your well-being. That's why conservatives want to get CRT out of schools, because they think that's going to put kids into a bad environment that's going to affect them for the rest of their lives. That's why we recognize that the family unit is important. It is good to grow up with 2 functional parents, 2 stable parents. It is good to grow up with people who are providing you with support and need and all that fun stuff. And we recognize that without those things, well, people are going to have far worse outcomes. So when you see that so when you want to believe that America is a wonderful place, racism is over, you start to develop what I call post hoc new racism. Well, if white people are doing this way and Black people aren't doing great, and since all racism has been solved, well, there must be something wrong with Black people. So it perpetuates this. And we see that a lot, today, we see racial disparities that have been proven not via correlation, but via experimentation. We have a control for other factors. Black people are more likely to be stopped by the police for no other, with everything else being controlled for. Black people are less likely to get callbacks on resume when the resumes are actually equal. So there are a lot of different factors. Black children are more likely to have their behavioral attributes attributed to something wrong with them rather than their environment. So we still see that. And this doesn't mean that every single white person in America or every single American is racist or that they hate Black people. It's trying to put a little bit more nuance in it and hopefully come up with better solutions that are going to help a lot of people. So yeah, I'm interested to see where this conversation goes.
All right, thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of come at this from a different perspective. But I think it's heavily intertwined. So let me start this off by conceding a lot of ground myself and my partner don't actually need to agree on every part of this issue in order to agree on the fundamentals of it. I don't think there's anything I'm going to say here that he'll be in any way opposed to. I'm going to come at this from a totally different angle and talk about implicit racism, also called implicit bias. As I think in order to understand the left's narrative on the topic of systemic racism, you need to see how they tie it into implicit bias. Without implicit bias, the narrative here really falls apart. I'm open to the idea of systemic or institutional racism in the United States, and I'll tell you why. Because there very clear was objective systemic racism in the United States, and that wasn't a very long time ago. There are many alive today that lived through Jim Crow, as it only really ended in 1968 with the Fair Housing Act. For a frame of reference, my father, who is still alive, and he was born in 1947. I think you could probably make a compelling case that it's worth looking at various institutions for the remains of laws and regulations or unfair procedures that could easily still remain, considering such a short amount of time has elapsed between the repeal and our current year. That said, there are no laws anybody can ever seem to point to, nor institutions, nor regulations that are inherently racist, kind of what tomfoolery there was saying. They can also never seem to point to the idea that even most white people are racist, as white people seem to reject en masse the idea of white supremacy in organization, groups, national identities, etc. That said, I'm fine with the exploration of investigating all of the various police departments, courts, state laws, federal laws for signs of these things and having them removed if found to be purposely discriminatory. My main opposition to the idea of the left's form of institutional racism is subconscious and unconscious bias in regards to racism. The unconscious thought principle, for instance, is assigned this way. If you take the unconscious thought principle, it asserts that the existence and nature of two kinds of thought, conscious and unconscious. Conscious thought is defined as objective, relevant, or task-relevant, cognitive, or effective. While unconscious thought is different than unconscious bias, it's important to note that evidence for unconscious activities of thought in most cases is heavily contested. In regards to unconscious thought for this postulation, for instance, in the largest analysis to date, examining all studies to date and contributing a large-scale replication study, it was stated that large-scale replication found that there exists no reliable support for the claim that a momentary diversion thought leads to better decision-making than a period of deliberation, for instance. I'm critical of a lot of science due to the replication crisis, but note that this was a large-scale replication study. Unconscious bias is interesting, and I'll read you a passage from Enact Solutions during an unconscious bias workshop. The human brain is a formidable pattern matching machine. Sifting visual, verbal, and behavioral cues, it helps us, for example, to quickly determine whether someone is friendly or hostile. Much of what it does outside of our awareness. Our unconscious mind processes 200,000 times more information than our conscious frontal lobes. You can find the same information from Exeter, UK, or treasures.org or pipelineequity.com on their unconscious bias training. What's the basis for the unconscious mind to process 200,000 times more information than our conscious mind, you ask? Interestingly, almost all the unconscious bias training I could find said this, but never sourced it. In fact, just Google subconscious mind 200,000 times faster than conscious mind, and the result for page after page after page will be about unconscious bias. This is a script. It comes from a man named Dr. Pete Jones. I have no idea where he gets this information because I can't find any solid scientific evidence anywhere that the unconscious mind runs at 200,000 times the speed of the conscious. My main problem here being this. There are a lot of studies out there for how fast the conscious and subconscious mind are, but it's all heavily contested and may not be in any way accurate. Unconscious thought may not even exist. The amount of information for our unconscious mind can process, or what it can even process, is highly speculative, and the science is very much not settled. It's even been postulated we may never know, so giving people anti-bias training based on unconscious bias seems absurd to me. From the University of Michigan Law School, titled The Failure of Implicit Bias, another name for unconscious bias, quote, Critics have questioned what, if anything, the IAT, implicit association bias test, actually shows, and whether, even if the IAT shows the existence of implicit bias, that bias is purely internal or instead actually translates into actions that treat people differently on the basis of race or other characteristics. End quote. This would, of course, imply conscious bias instead of unconscious, which I think is provable and easily solvable. I think if you can't point to data as being an indicator of systemic racism, and I don't think that you can, that you're left with unconscious bias. And I think that's where this conversation is going to end up, in the realm of the subjective rather than the objective, which is why I wanted to tie it together now rather than later, and I'll pass it over.
All right, so yeah, now we can just open up the floor, you guys. If there is a lot of interruptions, then we might go into timed back and forth, but just give it away.
Okay, so one, I want to say that like I really appreciate you guys coming to talk about this. Like I'm glad that it's the two of you guys that we're talking to, because I think that this is going to be a good faith conversation. So first, I don't want to get into like solutions, because Jangles is an actual lefty. Him and I would likely disagree on solutions, right? And this is one of the reasons that I think right-wingers should have an at least agreed upon understanding of systemic racism, so that if it does exist, then we would be able to come up probably with better solutions than they would. So the first question I want to know is, if systemic racism did exist, would you guys want to fix it? Like if they are being oppressed specifically based on the color of their skin, would you want to fix it based on the color of somebody's skin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Show me the racist law, and I'll fight it right with every leftist. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So I guess I'm not so worried about like implicit bias. I think that it exists in some ways, like Jangles mentioned, with like court systems, black people getting longer sentences, stuff like that. But more so, I'm worried about, like, I think that sometimes we have good intentions.
No. You gotta back up for me. What do you mean implicit bias exists because of black people getting longer sentences? That's one of the most important points actually to hash out, because I don't think that you can indicate any actual evidence as to why they get it, other than you think there's implicit bias.
Well, that's why I said that, like, I'm not truly worried about that aspect of it. Like, when it comes...
Yeah, but I am worried about that.
That's the whole debate.
Oh, it's not to me. So, to me, what the debate is there are systems that have good intentions when they're put into place. They just happen to have bad outcomes for specific people. So, like... Due
to implicit bias, though, right?
No.
So here's an example of a law, if I can just come in real quick. So in the 60s and 70s, just after the civil rights movements, obviously, like different public parks, public amenities were starting to integrate again. You can no longer say that a public pool can be whites only. So there's a lot of instances all across the country of, instead of integrating white people through a fit, say I'm not oftentimes resorting to violence, saying, no, we will not swim with black people. We will not let these black people into the pool, even though it's now legal. And so what the solution was to shut down the pools. Now, this is not a racist law. They didn't shut down the pools for black people and let white people come in. They shut down the pools for everybody. However, obviously there was racist intent.
Get multi-symptom relief with Buckley's Complete Plus Mucus. It tastes awful, and it works.
We're proud to support Bernie's well-deserved me time. Lazy boy, long live the lazy.
Hint behind this, but the letter of the law showed it. There's also the instance, if you want to bring it back to modern day, or mostly modern day, the North Carolina voter suppression bill a couple of years ago. They found they surgically targeted black people based on things that black people did more proportionally. So here's the thing:
how is any of that subconscious bias?
If you target things,
that would be conscious bias, right?
It could be either or.
No, it would just be conscious bias, because you would be targeting them consciously, not unconsciously.
The tough part is that you're inferring what the motivations of these people are. If you find that black people have 80%, black people have.
I mean, if they're doing it on purpose, then they're making a conscious. They're consciously doing it.
Yeah,
right?
But unless they explicitly say that is the purpose, that is their intent, you have to infer.
But in your examples, you said that it was. You said, like, for instance, they didn't want blacks to come to the pool, so they consciously came to that decision, not subconsciously.
Yeah, but in that law, but that was not like conscious versus unconscious bias, that was race neutral laws. So Rob said that, like, show me the racist law, I'll be against it. Well, that law
right, but I'm just pointing out that that's not
Andrew, let him finish though.
Okay, no, but I'm not talking about unconscious versus conscious here. You're really focused on that. I was talking about like how laws that are race neutral, that are colorblind, can very easily be done with racist intent as long as you disguise your language appropriately.
But the point is the intent. Right. That's the point. And that's what BPF's getting to here. Right. Like, sure. And again, I'm not certainly in the past, and it could still happen today. I'm not so, against this idea that I'm like, oh no, that this couldn't happen today. Of course not. I don't think that. But show me the specifics. Instead, what we see with the people that talk about systemic racism a lot is they say, well, the intent doesn't matter. There are these systems that exist, and because of things in the past, that means that there's still systemic racism that exists today, even if we try to apply colorblind law. Let me give you an example of how this doesn't work, because we're just saying that unequal outcomes prove that even if there's not the intent, it's still systemic racism. Okay, but just real quick, just a yes or no, and I think you'll both agree to this. Will you admit that even in these systems, such as the system of law enforcement, that it's big and there's many parts of it? So one part could be systemically biased against women, another part could be systemically biased against blacks, etc. Would everyone agree with that?
Yeah, but I don't know why what was your characterization that every disparate outcome must be due to systemic racism?
Well, that's what we see given as evidence for the massive amounts of systemic racism.
Well, hold on, no, you haven't seen anything in this debate. So
okay, we'll get to it then. I
would appreciate it if you talk to me instead of like creating this person to argue against.
We'll get to it. So my question is this: do you acknowledge that when it comes to most white collar crimes, the people most disproportionately affected are white and Asian Americans?
Probably. I would believe that, but I haven't seen the research.
Okay, so are those cool? Would that mean those laws are systemically racist against white and Asian Americans?
In some way, if white and Asian Americans are more likely to be in jobs where they're able to commit white collar crimes, then yeah, I would say that would be a type of systemic racism.
So do you think that that's done on purpose?
No, that's what I'm saying. Is I don't think these things are done on purpose.
Bias?
No, I think I think it's not about implicit bias. It's about a good intention with just a desperate outcome.
Okay, so just real quick, I'll say the term is effectively meaningless then, because no one would say we should get rid of white-collar crime laws or adjust them because it happens to affect white people more. We wouldn't get rid of rape laws because it happens to affect men get arrested more for them. So if we're just saying, well, anytime there's and this is Jangles, when you said no one's saying this in the debate, yes, Tom is saying that, so I am addressing what's being said in the debate. If we just look and say anytime there's unequal outcomes, that shows systemic bigotry or systemic bias, then the term's meaningless. Like we could parse this into infinite amount of categories. Oh, this law is biased against young people. It's systemically bigoted against young. Oh, this one's systemically bigoted against men. This one's systemically racist against Asians. And it just makes the entire term meaningless.
Okay, so do you think that all of the research and data to come out like supporting the notion of systemic racism, do you think that the only thing that they're looking at cross-sectional observational data to say that well, black people are here, white people are here, therefore systemic racism? Or do you think that maybe professionals in their fields might look into it a little bit deeper than that and are less likely to just throw out that based on like
the objective data is conflicted? That's first and foremost, the objective data on this is conflicted. So all you're left with is subjective data. Well, that's almost all you're left with is what you would call qualitative over quantitative data.
I actually have quantitative data. So, by the way, that's not what subjective versus objective means.
I'm just saying that from your perspective, the data that you're going to be able to produce can easily be contested, is what I'm saying. If you want to produce it, we can do that. But what I'm saying is that overall, what's going to end up happening here is this is going to default to implicit bias because it has to.
Well, we have to default to inference because one of the problems of like explicit racism being the only form of racism, like intent is very hard to measure. If I don't tell you what is my intent going into this?
I would think to have a good faith debate.
Yeah, well, I can't tell you like every aspect of my intent. If I can't. Yeah, exactly. So you have to infer that based on like external
like
factors.
Implicit bias, right?
Like, yeah, kind of like implicit bias.
Yeah,
and sometimes that's all you can do. Well, hold on, that's all you can do. So in science, sometimes that's the best we can do. For example, we can't measure pain. Like, you think pain, that's important to do in medical studies?
So that's not, we have to do by.
I'm just making the point that there are subjective things that sometimes that's the best we can do.
Yes, that's true, but the measurements aren't very good. So when we're talking about this and we're defaulting to something like implicit bias versus what objective data says, right? Like Rob
let's
says,
talk about
you
it.
can kind of start tossing it right out the window because you just don't have a good way to quantify it.
Let's toss some stuff out the window. Okay. So I'm sure both of you are familiar with, and Tom, if I start like ramroding and like taking up too much time, okay, I'm sure both of you are familiar with the traffic stop study.
Sure.
Is that but if
there's many of them, but sure.
The big one, and for the purpose of the audience, it is a large scale analysis of racial disparities in police stops across the United States, published in Nature back in 2020. So they assessed 100 million traffic stops. They used traffic stop data. They used quantitative data. And they found that there was a big racial disparity during the daytime, but there was a lower racial disparity during the nighttime. And even though you cannot, and based on the nature of the data, you cannot explicitly measure every single cop's intent, but they theorized that, well, this is good evidence to support the position that there are racial disparities, that there are racial intents in stopping black people and Hispanic people over white people. Now, they don't claim that is 100%. That is what's happening. It is part of the data that supports that there might still be a racial disparity in how people are policed, and some of that is based on perception.
So let's grant it to you. So let's just grant that to you, right? Let's say that that's good evidence that there could be a problem, right? How would you address that other than by utilizing some sort of scale for implicit bias? Could you?
That'd be very, very difficult. A lot of it would have to do with like these. I have not seen any good. This is very discouraging to me. I haven't seen, maybe it exists, but I haven't seen great data that any like unconscious bias training has been very, very effective.
Sure hasn't.
I'm saying I haven't seen it. See, look, I'm being good faith. I'm telling you my lack of knowledge.
But what I would like to talk about the study in a second. But
I would too. I actually, I'm not done talking about this.
Sure.
So I would like to see like what are some programs we could explore that would like have like a more community focused policing, because right now I think, and this is an opinion that I have, I can't back this up, it feels like there is too much of an us versus them mentality within the police. Like it's the police and then there's the people that they're in battle against.
I understand what you're saying, but again, if you can't really address this through any other framework, you think, than through the perception that maybe there's implicit bias, then we instantly have a problem, because there's no good data at all that unconscious bias can even exist, right? There isn't any. So essentially, you would have to somehow be able to measure that these police officers were consciously being racist, and that was the purpose of them pulling people over, let's say, more than they were pulling white people.
This is setting up a literally impossible standard, and I think that's
well, that's because the standard is literally impossible. That's my point.
So we could not have any sort of like. What if I said the words "I hate white people" right now on stream? Could you prove that I actually hated white people?
No, but I would at least have better evidence than what you would have stating that there's implicit or unconscious bias.
But no, well, you would still have to
for instance, if I said you didn't say you hate white people, right, but I think unconsciously you do, I think that's a worse standard for evidence than if you stated it first.
Yeah, but we have a lot of data, and if we have a small sample size, you'll say that the sample size is too small. If we have a big sample size, but that limits like the detail that we can get. So it seems like there's no.
Sounds like you're in search of a problem, not a solution.
No, it sounds like you've determined that any solution would be wrong, which means you made sure that there's not a problem.
So going back to the study, so what this is called is the Veil of Darkness study. First off, it wasn't 100 million traffic stops, I don't believe. I believe the larger, in the entire Veil of Darkness, if you could post the link, I'd be happy to see it. My understanding was that...
I can't post the link, but I can post the citation to it. Is that good enough?
Sure, and then I'll look at it when I'm done talking. But my understanding, I could be wrong, my understanding was that there was 100 million stops that were looked at, and a proportion of those were from this Veil of Darkness study. So what this was they took a specific area, I believe it was somewhere in St. Louis, and they took 15 minutes before sunset and 15 minutes after sunset, and they used those times to determine the proportion of people that were stopped. And there was it was something like an 11% increase in blacks that were stopped in night as opposed to during the day. And the theory theory is, by the way, this is a good study. This is what we should try to be doing, because we should try to have a control to get out all the other possible disparities that would lead to the reasons that people would be pulled over. And so this is trying to say, well, the fact that it's dark would mean that the difference is, if we see a difference in data, that would be largely measurable by the police were unable to see the person that was in the car. And so what ends up happening is, it turns out during the day or during night, we saw am I correct in this, Jangles? It's during night there was a higher percentage of black, or during the day there was a higher percentage of blacks stopped, correct?
Black and Hispanic stops, yes.
Right. So the argument is, when they could see the people that were driving, then they would all of a sudden be more likely to pull them over because they were black or Hispanic. But even the founders of this study,
no, additionally, the study also found that black people, there was a lower bar to like justify searching their car.
Regardless, what we see is that there are even problems in this study that you can't prove definitively that the reason was racism on the behalf of the police. For example, almost all of these stops were pulled over in well-lit areas, and when people went back to see where the officer stopped, many of the people that observed this said that it was blatantly obvious that you could still see inside the car. So just because it's at night doesn't mean that if you're in a well-lit city that you can't see the race of the person behind the car, or at least see if they're dark or if they're light. And there's other factors.
That we're not talking about the same study.
Sure, I can post the study that I'm talking about. The study I'm talking about was referencing, let's see, Jeffrey Grugger and Greg Ridgway. Maybe I'm looking at a different study than you.
This is Pearson et al.
Okay, so I'll look at your study, but the study I'm looking at that attempted to do the veil of darkness, there are all sorts of potential problems, like the potential lighting. It could be that there are literally, because of people's different lifestyle choices, more people of color that are on the road during the day than in the evening. And there could be a lot of other factors. But even let's say that that's theoretically true. Again, we can see that what we're talking about here, do you have the disparity? What was the disparity, the increase in percentage that they were pulled over?
I don't have the numeric percentage of it. It's somewhere.
But it wasn't like 100%. It was something like 10%. Correct.
Is that not good enough?
Well,
yeah, but by the way, hold on. I agree with you. There are flaws in the veil of darkness studies. I actually found three papers that looked at what the flawed methodology of the veil of darkness study, like the veil of darkness is, because it makes a big assumption. Like, yeah, these authors. So good authors, like good research, are very, very upfront about the limitations of their studies. They tell you, do not say that this study 100% means this. Like, they're very good about acknowledging those limitations. That's what a good researcher does. And
well, they can be. They can be good at it.
They can be good at it, but think of the point I was going to make here is that there are problems. One of the biggest things is the assumption that black people, white people, and Hispanic people drive the same during the day and during the flight. Yeah, that is a big assumption. So and
let me give you another. Please, you can finish.
You can talk. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Fuck.
Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. Cool. That was funny. Like, okay. They've done that. There are three separate studies, and I'm happy to put. I'm just gonna go ahead and get in the habit of putting my citations in our chat, where the actual live chat can't see, so it's secret. It's behind a veil of darkness. See, metaphor. That means I'm smart. So here, these three studies looked at the problems with the veil of darkness, and they found there is a problem with the veil of darkness. There is a incorrect assumption that black drivers, Hispanic drivers, and white drivers drive the same during the day and the night. And they came to the conclusion, because they looked at other things, like instances of like speeding, instances of traffic fatalities, and what they came to the conclusion was that it was actually the veil of darkness underestimates racial bias, because black and Hispanic drivers tend to drive slower during the day because they know that they can be seen. So if anything, that veil of darkness analogy is incorrect, but just in the way that says that it's underestimating racial bias.
Okay, so again, and there's just real quick, there's other things, like, for example, if black people tend to be poor, it could be that, or Hispanic people, it could be that their cars have things that they would be pulled over for, such as like a muffler hanging down and things like that would be more noticeable in the day than during the night. Anyways, there's a litany of problems. The point that I bring this up is, when we're talking about systemic racism, right, is this real? Like, again, there are bigger disparities of systemic bigotry. For example, research from the Michigan, from the law department of Michigan, I could link this if you like, shows that the disparity between law enforcement treatment between blacks and whites is 6 times worse when you compare men to women. So in other words, if you're 10% more likely to get a longer sentence as a black person compared to a white, you're something like 30-something% more likely to get a longer sentence as a man to a woman, and things like that. So if we're focused on systemic bigotry and unequal application of the law, the big fight would be on the bigger problem. That's how we would triage it. Yet we see almost no people that are talking about the massive apparent bigotry in law enforcement targeting men over women, which is 6 times worse than the targeting of blacks over
I agree.
whites.
Intersectionality is important.
Yeah.
Okay, but we could say that, and I understand that we're talking about what we're debating in this debate and what the people here are saying. But let's not pretend that the larger movement that's out there with our cultural and political movement that seems hyper-focused on race and systemic racism and the need to talk about all this stuff. Are we really?
Okay.
Is the best evidence we could come up with? Well, there was one study that showed that you're 11% more likely to be pulled over for a traffic ticket. And there's holes in that study as even the people that did it.
That you agree with, there's holes in the study, by the way.
Hold on, I agree with. Yeah, I was very honest about there being holes in the study, and then I posted 3 other studies saying that they were underestimating racial disparities. If this is one of the reasons like political conversations can get bad, is because if you're honest about the limitations of your own studies, if you're honest about your lack of knowledge, that can be easily attacked as you don't know anything. So it like disincentivizes people to be honest. So
right, real quick,
I have a lot.
Well, I'm sorry if the evidence for your position
is very good, and I have a lot more studies.
If the evidence for your position, you say this makes my position less defensible, right? Then you can't blame us for that. That's not us being bad faith or being mean. We're just pointing out that the evidence that you produce is not very defensible evidence by your own admission.
I have 15 more studies.
Okay, and just real quick, the reason that this matters, right, is because you are saying that the intent doesn't matter, right?
No, I'm not.
So it's one
no, wait, stop. No, I'm not.
Okay, so there has to be intent for systemic racism.
No, I'm not. Do you think this is either or? It's binary. Either intent exists, and therefore racism, or you don't need intent at all.
Give me a second. Hold on, because this is what I was trying to avoid. We need to agree on what these lines are first, and what it is that we're like trying to prove before we start trying to prove it with data and studies. So let's say, let me give an example. Okay, so like, a lot of the things that I'm going to look at is like culture within the black community and say that this affects a lot of things. And then I'm going to ask, well, why is that culture bad? So then I one of the like greatest indicators of like a successful culture or even success in America is whether or not you grew up within a 2-parent household. Okay, so we can look at things like welfare and see whether or not welfare has guidelines in it that actually incentivizes single-parent households. Okay, now say it does. Why are black people disproportionately on welfare? Well, then we could look at like, were there banks that were like drawing outlines around areas that were disproportionately black and saying, hey, we don't want to fund these areas, we don't want to put businesses in these areas so that they have economic opportunity.
We kind of already agreed, me and Rob at the outset, that if those become provable issues, that we're all about taking care of what those disparities are. Correct. If they're provable disparities. So I don't really see why you have to redefine lines we've already drawn for you.
It's not redefining lines. It's that those things that we're talking about have effects on them. So when we look at it and we say, well, why would they disproportionately pull over cars? Or why would people do this at the pools? There are other effects that actually there's cause and effect that makes this happen. And we want to like agree that the effects actually happened to make this happen before we even start arguing over whether or not that happened.
Well, what they're arguing about is whether or not the effect is happening. That's the whole point here.
I understand. So, okay. So
then what are these arbitrary lines that you're trying to draw that we haven't already hashed out?
Okay, so would there be a reason for people to have a bias against black people? Is there like a cultural thing?
There could be.
Okay, and if there is, do you agree with that, Rob? Like there is a reason that white people or people like the majority within the United States would actually have a bias against black people.
Wait. Now that reframes
whoa. That's completely different.
Totally reframes.
I'm sorry. That's what I was asking.
No. I reject the framework that the majority, or that there would be a reason for the majority of white people to have some type of
I'm
vendetta
sorry.
against blacks.
I didn't mean the majority of white people. I mean white people as the majority, meaning like some people that are white who are the majority have a bias against black people
Okay,
who are
so
the
let me
minority.
make sure. Let me
Yeah,
just
go
make
ahead.
sure that I get this correct.
Go ahead.
Are you asking me if there's some white people who could have a bias against black people? Because if so, the answer is yes. If you're asking me, is there some framework for which white people follow through some institutional version to have some bias towards black people, my answer is no. And the burden of proof kind of falls on you to prove that that's so.
True. Okay, so
And if I could
Yeah,
answer
go
real
ahead.
quick too, because you asked me. Yeah, I mean, again, just like with your definition of systemic racism, what you're doing here is saying something that ends up being meaningless. Because I could literally take any group and say, yes, there are members of that group that have reason to be biased against any other group. So we could. So it's meaningless if it includes everything.
that is true. The problem is that's why I mentioned the fact that we are the majority and we are the people who will control the majority of things. So whether or not we are the ones with
how
the
long?
bias is going to make. Well, no, it's changing for sure. But this is
No, actually, even in your framework there of we're the majority, therefore, is also incorrect. Because a massive minority coalition already includes a large block of what you would call whites. Already includes that. So saying, well, they just instantly, because you're white and are in the majority, have control is an incorrect framework to start with.
There are a lot of studies like pointing to that. No, it's not an incorrect framework. Whites.
Yes, it is an incorrect framework.
White people. So I can.
Go ahead.
The,
I'm sorry,
okay.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
That's fine. That's fine. So white people, so this was, whites see racism as a zero-sum game that they are now losing. This was published in 2011 in the journal Perspectives on Psychological Science. I can copy and paste that if you would like. So a lot of white people, not because they're evil, not because they think that black people are inherently inferior, but just because it's like a combination of complex psychological factors like last place aversion, like a comfort with the status quo. They see that gains in black people must therefore come at the expense of white people. This has been documented time and time and again for decades. White people see black people gaining more status as a society. Sorry, white people see black people gaining more status in society as explicitly and inherently like low against white people. That's hurting white people. Black people, by the way, do not see it that way, to the point where way back in 2000, back before everything got woke, white people tended to see that anti-white racism was as big a problem as anti-black.
Okay, I get it. But can you prove that exists within what he calls the majority framework?
I can prove that a study said that white people thought that. I don't know if that would fit within his definition.
Wait. Okay, so his framework is this, Jangles. He's saying that because whites are a majority in the United States, that systemically most of them, because they're in charge, must have some sort of bias against blacks. That's the framework that he's offering up.
Now,
Is that essentially the framework that you're offering up here also, because you have a study that says white people are what? Concerned about losing what? The majority status?
Well, let me ask you a question real quick. Do you not think that we are like very tribalistic in the way that we gather, the way, like places that we live? Like, are we not gathering in places around others that look like us and sound like us?
That's true that tribalism exists, but it doesn't necessarily always exist along racial lines, which is why you have diverse coalitions, massive diversity in coalitions right now.
Yeah, because intersectionality is a thing.
What's that?
What do you mean, like the diverse coalitions? What specifically are you
have diverse coalitions in voting blocks. You have diverse coalitions in psychology itself, which is massively underrepresented, for instance, by white straight males.
No, you're right. The thing is
massively, by the way, underrepresented by white straight males inside of psychology. So the thing is that within these dynamics, you already have massive diverse coalitions, man.
Okay, so you are correct, but like we gather based on like all sorts of things, but the most visible, the most obvious thing is your race, the color of your skin, the shape of your nose, your hair, things like that. The people who look like you is the most obvious marker of somebody.
86% of psychologists are white, by the way. Sorry to interrupt. 86% of psychologists are white.
So
sorry to interrupt.
So I agree with you that there are like other markers that we could look at, but the most obvious one is your race, and so
that literally sounds racist to me, Tom. That literally sounds racist to me.
It's kind of.
I'm glad you lowered the bar for racism just of like noticing people's race. That makes our job easier.
If you say we're tribalists, right? And noticeably, we tend to be attracted to people who look the most like us and talk the most like us and things like this. You're basically making the assertion that whites want to hang out with white people, right?
Well, there's white culture, there's black culture. We want to exist with people who have similar culture to us, similar interests, similar like that. Like, so yes, like if you want to call that racist, sure, but I would disagree with that. I would say that
and one
this
of the
is
best
tribalism.
ways to combat this, one of the best ways to combat that tribalism is to encompass more people in your tribe. If you are white and you grow up in an all-white community and you see your first black person at the age of 20, you might feel a little freaked out. That is something different. That's why diversity is important, to increase your familiarity with a large swath of people with different looks, with different beliefs, with different all sorts of factors to increase your comfort level. That has been proven time and time again. The more
so I mean,
comfortable you are with a diverse group of people,
we understand diversification is good when it comes to tribalism. What's your point within the framework
I'm saying we still
just having a majority white, soon to be minority population of whites, in fact, right now are somehow in charge of the existing framework, so therefore that proves that there's systemic racism. That's my point.
There could be some sort of bias against them. So, like, one example is, like, I forget the name of the study.
Could be.
Right, well, no, it's likely, because if we're more likely to want to be around people who are like us, then when it comes to something like hiring, we're more likely to want to hire people like us. So a good example is like the study where they look at names on the application and they decide whether or not they hire those people based on the name. And now the idea isn't just that like they hate black people, so if the name is Shaniqua, they're not going to hire that person. It's that they look at names and have this bias that says like, well, somebody who has names that I'm more used to, that like I think would get along with me, or a person that I would like. These sorts of things are evidence of some sort of implicit bias.
Yeah, BPF, you define bias as like a vendetta. You like conflated those two terms, like bias.
No, I didn't conflate anything.
Well, he asked you,
operating off of the framework that was offered to me. I haven't offered a framework.
Tom asked you if you think that white people might have a bias, and you said no, white people don't have a vendetta against black people. That was clearly you conflating those two terms.
No, I wasn't conflating anything. He offered up a framework, and I, within his existing framework, responded to it.
But a vendetta has it has intent.
Okay, fine. Right? Get rid of vendetta. I don't think it's relevant.
All right, fair enough.
So
Rob,
if I could jump in, yes, please. So again, so the problem is like when we're making everything race essentialism, like this is the problem. And what I said in my opening statement, the truth is there are people in positions of power in this country, and it's good to fight back against these people in positions of power. Those people are laughing their ass off at the fact that we could be divided so easily on race. So, for example, when you're just making this whites stick together with whites and blacks stick together with blacks, etc., that's not true. In fact, we can see a huge movement for large swaths of white people in this country that go out of their way to try to embrace all of the ideas that many of the people in the black community are saying are necessary for our country. So they talk about things like diversity. They're intentionally going out there. They feel more comfortable being around people of different skin colors because they think that it pervades some sort of badge that, oh, look how good I am. I'm embracing this diversity. So this brings us to things like the name study. Here's the problem with the name study. Like, for example, one of the most common black boy names in this country is Anthony. Did that study use the name Anthony for a black boy? No.
You know what validity means?
Do I know what means?
Do you know what validity means in the context of scientific studies?
Explain it.
Oh, geez.
Validity means
endless definitions. Go ahead.
Well, no, this is very important. So validity in a scientific study means, are you measuring what you think you're measuring? So yeah, Anthony might be a very, very common name for black boys, but for the purposes of measuring bias, you're not measuring that. You're measuring, well, what do people think about that name? So there's a very common study brought up like to counter the, I forget what the name of the study is, like the single study. I have a meta-analysis that says the same thing, but like, people didn't discriminate against like Washington, but they didn't measure what they were saying that they were measuring. If people can't differentiate on a resume whether someone's likely to be black or likely to be white, that you cannot measure racial bias. People have to perceive. No, I'm not done. Right. People have to perceive that these names are associated with black people and associated with white people, and that's what these experiments did. So there's a meta-analysis of those experiments with like 55,000 applicants across 28 different studies that found the same thing. Black people are like 38% less likely than white people with the exact same resume to get callbacks versus like white people, because people have perceived one to be black and one to be white.
Okay, so again, that's not necessarily what it's measuring. What it's measuring is names that we consider uncommon or strange names versus knowns that we don't. So, for example, if you did a study that measured the callbacks of Anthony versus Bubba Ray, which is considered a redneck, lower-class white name, what do you think the callbacks would be on that?
They'd probably be lower. Fortunately for those, maybe, we don't know. Fortunately, in that study that you're talking about, they did control for class, and it didn't affect anything.
No, they didn't. What white name did they use of a poor lower-class white name that they compared, like, Laquanda to? Bubba Ray?
They controlled for, they used a lot of the data. I can't remember off the top of my head the one specific study, but no, they controlled for class and it didn't seem to account for anything. This is important.
You had a lot of time to talk. So if I can go.
Why would black
names? What we can see is that there's no evidence that this study. There is no evidence that this was not that it was measuring race. No, because it was measuring what we perceive. Please. It was measuring what they perceived as strange names, right? Nope. And again, these are yes, that's exactly what it was doing. You show me the study that you show me for it.
Hold on, just let Rob finish, and then
right. So I'll be interested to see how they control for it. He could provide that if he wants. But let me say this: this is one of the biggest myths that we have going, and people are afraid to say this. I'm just going to come out right and say this: there is white privilege in this country. There's also black privilege, and there's straight privilege, and there's gay privilege, and there's cis privilege, and there's trans privilege. All of these things in different scenarios can be privilege or detriments to you, right? And we sit here and we talk about these, studies that are like, oh, based on names, callbacks, things like this. Here's something that's true, and I'll be interested to see if our opponents agree to this. There is not one Fortune 500 country in this country that wouldn't jump at the chance to have black people on their board of directors. And if they had equal resumes to white people, they would virtue signal so hard. Look at how many black people, look at how many women. In fact, we see laws being proposed saying that this should be mandated. So the idea that we have to pretend, oh, if you're black and have an equal resume, you're not going to get a callback. It might be true at like McDonald's. It might be true at Dick's Sporting Goods. But in the jobs that we continue, and we don't even have evidence that it's necessarily true, but the jobs that we consider that, again, we'll see if you could show the control for that study, but the higher end jobs or things like we see getting into academia, which all the lefty studies show that, having access to a prestigious university and things like that enhance your chances in all measures of life. And all of those things we can see that being black is actually beneficial.
Okay, hold on.
It worries me a lot that you said it.
Hold on, because Rob, you are correct in the ways that there are different types of privileges for everybody. I disagree with the thing about businesses would want to hire black people because Google, Twitter, these massive companies who could hire black people if they wanted to. They could make it a huge dent in how poor black people are, but they're not going out and hiring them. They're hiring Asians and Indian people and white people. So there are different types of privileges. You are correct. But because again, white people are the majority, it makes a bigger difference. And the types of systemic racism that are going to apply to minorities are going to be greater and have greater effects because they are a minority.
Jangles, it
worries me a lot that
link that you posted just takes us to the abstract. Do you have an actual link to the study itself?
You shouldn't use Sci-Hub because that's illegal. Don't use Sci-Hub. I cannot tell you to do anything illegal, so do not use Sci-Hub. Do not go to this link for Sci-Hub that I'm posting.
So, Rob, earlier you mentioned bigotry of low expectations. I want individuals held accountable, right? I want, if an individual commits a crime, I want them to be held accountable. I want them to go to jail. And if an individual comes to me and is like, man, I can't do anything, systemic racism is making it to where I can't even get a job, I'm going to be like, you're an idiot, dude. Go get a freaking job, right? But on a systemic level, on a greater level, there are things that we can do to help these people. What it is in reality is that these people have more barriers to go through than most white people do, and we say we'll just do it anyways. This is actually bigotry of high expectations. We expect more of them than we do of everybody else.
That's not true. And so what we can see is actually in things that would be massively important in this country, that there are detriments to being white that you don't see with other races. For example, there's constant claim that there isn't even white society or white culture, that it's an amalgamation. We have people saying that whiteness is bad, whiteness is evil. It's difficult for people to want to. And by the way, I'll say this just flat out. I don't give a shit at all about my race. I don't care at all about it. But to people have pride in their white race or white culture and things like that is frowned upon. There aren't really support groups or celebrities or people in positions of power that are defending whiteness. We see all of this with all sorts of minorities, especially with black.
Yeah, do we have people defending like how proud they are being straight? Or how proud they are of being
and again, so this is the point. So if I could finish my point, right? So here's the point.
What's the purpose?
There are millions of poor white Americans, right? And those poor white Americans have a double-edged sword against them. Oftentimes, they're just as poor and living in very many of the situations that poor black Americans are living in. Yet, we look at poor black Americans and say, oh my God, we need to have networks to help you. There are people that say, oh, your culture is important. We need to help you based on this, based on that, blah, blah, blah. But the poor white Americans are told, no, you're part of the problem.
But are they poor based on the color of their skin?
Yes, right, because everybody take a drink every time they say red running or Gish Gallop.
Gish Galloped a lot.
Yeah.
I see right here in the private chat that you've dropped, 4 studies so far? You're worried about his Gish Gallop?
Is that what you think Gish Galloping means? Dropping studies in chat behind the scenes?
Well, I mean, do you have a reasonable expectation that you're going to be able to drop studies like this and we're going to actually be able to go over them in real time?
But you're not citing what we're asking. And if I could just finish my point. So I could give you an example. I have a friend named Jerome. Jerome went to the little university I went to, Clarion University, right? And Jerome decided to get drunk a lot and not go to classes. Well, a group called Jerome and said, hey, we noticed that as a freshman, your grades are dropping. We'd like to help you. Will you come in? He said, sure. He goes in. Here it was the Black Student Union. And they're like, oh, who are you? He says, I'm Jerome. Jerome happens to be white. They said, sorry, we can't help you, right? There are all sorts of programs in our university that are designed to help specifically minorities. We have minority counselors in almost all of academia. In fact, it's the fastest growing position in academia. We see in culture, the encouragement of black culture and things like that. All of this shows that, yes, the real problem here is class and power. And what we do when we hyper-focus on race and we say, well, no matter what, if you're white, you're in the majority. That's small comfort to the white homeless person. That's small comfort to the white person that's struggling and working 9 to 5.
So hold on, I actually grew up as a poor white person. And dude, the topic of this debate is systemic racism. All right, it sounds like what you're saying when the topic of the debate is racism, that to focus on race at all, to make that a part of the conversation at all, you just never do it. So there's a couple of points. One, I did grow up in a poor white community. I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, literally the same county that Lyndon B. Johnson, if I remember that correctly, started his war on poverty, because my county was the poorest all-white county in the United States. I wonder why he decided to start it there. So yeah, I grew up in poverty. I grew up in Appalachia. So think in your head, what are some stereotypes about Appalachia? Now, I don't know. Now, this could just be a difference of opinion, but when I hear a lot of conversation about the opioid epidemic in Appalachia, it's no, we're not attributing this to the individual. We blame pharmaceutical companies, which is fine. With the poverty in Appalachia, we blame the coal companies just completely vacating the area and decimating the local economy, which is based. You should do that. But there's a lot of data saying that we're more likely to attribute white poverty, white crime, white any kind of white, problem that white people tend to have disproportionately over black people. We tend to associate that with systemic issues, because how can white people be doing bad? White people are great, but there's data say we're more likely to attribute problems that are predominantly in the black community to the individual. That's why the solution to the opioid crisis in rural white America is get after the pharmaceutical companies and do that. That is correct. You are not wrong for thinking that. But when we talk about systemic racism, black people just need to act better. Now I want to pull it back a little bit, because it really worries me.
This sounds like a Gish Gallop.
And by the way,
it really worries me.
Gish Gallop.
Unfortunately, you laid out 9 points, and I have to go back so far. It really worries me that you said I did not prove anything. I put 4 sources. And then what about resumes? I'm going to read you. Hold on, I need to read just 2 sentences from the resume, and then I will shut up. Okay, I promise. So the study that I cited, the meta-analysis, is titled "Meta-analysis of Field Experiments." So this is not observational data; these are field experiments. Shows no change in racial discrimination in hiring over time. It was published in the Proceedings of the National Academies of Sciences in 2017. This was 28 studies representing 55,842 applications for 26,326 positions. That's enormous. Conducted since 1989. Whites receive, on average, 36 more callbacks than blacks and 24% more than Latinos. And this is important. Accounting for education, gender, study method, occupational groups, and local labor market conditions does little to alter this result.
Okay.
Again, how do they know that they're white versus black?
Second. There's one thing I got to get in on here, because if Rob's overarching point is, you said to him, we're having a debate here about systemic racism, right? And you're trying to make it essentially about everything except race. If his defense, which it was no, I find these to be more in line with class issues, that's just fine to say during a debate about racism, just so you know, Jangles.
Yes.
Just putting that in there.
Hold on.
Why are these things separate?
Hold on. We need to recenter this because, like Rob, again, you are right. There are more poor people than there are poor black people, and like we could do things to help just all poor people in general. The question here is, and the topic that we're talking about is whether or not these people, not just poor, but whether or not these things are happening to them based on the color of their skin. I don't think that any of us are going to make the point that there are a bunch of white people who are poor because they're white, but there are poor black people because they are poor. Because they are black. And so, that's the point
black
that we want to zone. Well,
no, that's not true.
I didn't say black makes you poor. I said that.
Why would you say that they're poor because they're black?
Because if systems are directly targeting people based on the color of their skin, we're back
to you having to prove the systems are there.
That's where we should
on their skin color.
That's what we should be focused on, and we keep moving off of this.
We don't see, but you haven't been able to prove that those systems exist. So quickly to talk to like Jangles' point here. One, the studies I still have yet to see other than black sounding names versus white sounding names.
How would you measure that? I need you to make sure that you understand the concept of scientific validity.
I understand. Please stop speaking down to me. I think our past interactions have shown that you don't have any ground to stand on, that you're somehow intellectually.
I want to hear it from you. Then surprise me. How would you measure this? How would you measure racial bias?
If I wasn't expressively looking at whether the application said white or black, you might do things like characteristics that you assume would be someone who was white or was black. And one of those could be name change. However, you would need to have the control of doing the opposite. You would need to have black people that had names that we consider common and white people that we consider lower class names, like Bubba Ray. Those studies didn't do that.
Hold on. If you do not perceive a name to be black, that is not a black person in the context of this study. These experiments, these were fake people.
That's why he's saying
I need to ask. If I say, can black people be named John Smith? Is that a possibility? Can black people be named John Smith? Of course. Oh, cool. Can white people be named John Smith?
Yeah.
Cool. And if I put two resumes
totally beside his point.
No, it's not. I'm very patiently explaining to you how these experiments are conducted. If I put two resumes up and they both say John Smith, but I decide in the back of my head that John Smith A is white and John Smith B is black, that's not measuring. That's not valid. That's not measuring the thing that we're trying to measure. What they did was they put the names. What are names that are identifiable?
You don't understand my point. We both understand what they did. We both understand. Now let me explain to you. What you need to do is do the inverse. How do we know that they aren't discriminating because they think that these names? It's not that they.
That is why.
Please let me finish. Please let me finish. Please let me finish. Please let me finish. Would you please let me finish? Would you please let me finish?
Let him finish.
Please let me finish, Tom. Can I finish my point, please?
Finish. God.
Thank you. Because we consider those names to be lower class, and we might associate them with black and lower class, but there are white names that we consider to be lower class and associated with white, like Bubba Ray. Did they do studies with people with names like Bubba Ray to see if they got less called blacks?
Hold on.
People that
Hold on.
You guys are still interrupting him. Hold on. Let him finish what he's going to say before you interrupt.
He asked the question. So he asked the question. So Rob, you are correct. And the thing is that there are some white names that you would look at and say this is a poor white name, but pretty much all black names are considered poor names because we look at black people to be poor and less educated because this is more likely for them to be poor and less educated.
That's called a presupposition, Tom. You're making a presupposition. You're supposing this. That's what you're doing.
It's an assumption, but
it's an assumption. That's his whole point. Don't you?
No, that's our point.
His point.
No, that's our point.
No, it's not.
Again, most black names are very similar to white names, right?
And this is why validity is important. If you do not, how would you design a study that looked at this? Let's say, because you have to isolate your variables. Hold on. No, you have to isolate your variables. You have to isolate your variables. You cannot look at like 18 different things at once, all right? So if we were designing a simple study, black versus white, and let's just keep it black versus white. How would you design a study that looked for racial bias in hiring applications?
But he's saying
the resumes have to be the same.
He's saying the
resumes have to be the same.
fine. He just wants to see it done in the inverse to see if the results are the same.
Okay,
it's
so
hard.
Now, so if they did not look at Bubba Ray, does this disprove the results of the study?
Yes, because we don't know we don't know if it shows racial bias or bias against low-class sounding names.
If we can infer that the most likely outcome is that it's racial bias.
No, this is the problem. So if this is the problem with everything that
I know so much more about how studies are conducted than you. I'm sorry.
Right, we know you do. Anyways, this is the problem. Everything that they say with systemic racism, it always comes down to, well, we infer. We infer. Yeah. Yes, there are holes in the study, but we infer. And that's the problem. And again, now, real quick, now that we're talking about systemic racism, let's talk about actual evidence that we don't have to infer. For example, we saw the city of Oakland, California suggested giving people that were making under $30,000 a year $1,000 a month, but only black people. White people that made less than that weren't entitled to that money. Is that systemic racism?
Cool, that's dumb and one city. Let's look at
next, the CDC.
Is that systemic? Is that systemic or is that one city?
Well, it's systemic in that city, is it not?
Hold on.
Cool.
Rob,
I guess if you like,
how many studies do we need before it's systemic, Jangles?
Hold on. I need to go back.
Apparently way more than I have.
Well, I'm asking you, how many do we need, since that's your argument? Your argument is that's only one study. How many studies do we need? Do we need 50? Do we need 60? How many do we need before it reaches the threshold of systemic racism?
Well, 4 studies is gish galloping, so I guess I just can't.
It's not gish galloping. That's a precise question, because that was your argument to him. Your argument to him was that systemic racism? Rob says, well, it could be. You said it couldn't be because it's just one study. So how many studies would you need?
So that thing can be shitty. You know what? If Rob is representing that accurately, I think that's kind of stupid that only black people like. Oh yeah, post the link. If that's happening, that's stupid. That's why we are looking at studies, because studies are not.
But here's the problem.
But every time we bring up a study, it's never good enough for you. It's never good enough. Because studies are conducted.
Let me say why. Because the argument is that these are things that have to do with like subconscious bias, or they're things that are hard to measure, right? And so when you're making a boisterous claim like this proves racism, and you should know this, Jangles, please. Yes, you're saying that study that you say
is good evidence for racism.
Okay, so you should know this, Jangles, as someone who brags about understanding studies. You have to factor out. Your job in a study is to factor out as many mitigating things as possible.
And when I said that they did, you just said they didn't.
Why do you again? Please,
because what we see is telling me something I've already said. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this upsets me. That I did say those things and you dismissed them. I read off to you. They factored out every other factor.
Evidence for racism, though, Jangles.
You said it was a good evidence for racism.
Hold on, you guys. Let Rob finish the point. Let Rob finish the point he was going to make, and then go back to
Yes, they conceded when we pushed them on this I guess we'll infer that it was racism, when they admitted that there is an equal plausible explanation that it could be because the name sounded low class. No. You have no evidence that that's not the case.
Admit that.
Hold on. No evidence
that it was the case, but you're presenting that as if it's just the preferable option.
Hold on, one second. What is Rob? What is the other option? So when we look at black names and we infer that they are poor,
I said this 15 times.
No, you
do the inverse study.
No, but I'm asking. No. Hold on. You're not answering my question. I'm asking, why would they look at a black name and assume they're poor?
What you're doing is called What you're doing is called question begging. That's literally what you're doing right now is question.
Aren't you begging the question by asking?
No, he's not begging.
What if?
I'm asking.
What if they looked at these other things?
Let me finish. He gave you a precise metric that he'd like to see.
Yes.
The precise metric he'd like to see is to see this done in the inverse.
Right.
To see if the results are different than what you did in these particular groupings of studies.
Right.
In this particular case, Mr. Foolery over here is literally begging the question by saying, well, what else could it be?
No, I'm not. I'm asking you what your answer is. I'm asking what you think the inverse study would show.
Let me give the answer.
Yes.
There is no, you're saying that because two things could simultaneously be true, a name could sound black and it could sound lower class. Oh, why are they assuming that black person is low class? But that's not the assumption. The assumption is, for example, the name Apple. Isn't there a celebrity who named their kid Apple? If I saw Apple on a resume, I might say, that sounds like a weird, trashy name.
Okay.
I don't know if that person's white or black.
Right.
It's the
Right,
fact
so-
that the
So-
name, and
no.
real quick,
Hold on.
please, let me
I
finish.
gotta
You
finish
asked the
this line of
question.
questioning.
So let me answer. So it's not that I'm thinking, I'm thinking of the racial makeup of this person. I'm thinking this name seems so ridiculous that they probably come from a family that I don't think's that good.
Right.
That's why we should take what. So I know white people named Star. I know white people named Destiny with the Z. I know white people named Cinnamon. I know white people named Bubba Ray.
Right.
Did we do studies to see how if those lower class or strange sounding names? It's real simple.
Okay, no.
They didn't do those studies. Why?
Hold on, because what is a rich sounding black name? A name that you would say this is a high class
sounding white
person,
name.
but we know.
John.
Yeah.
No, that's
Joe.
that's our point. Is that there are some
This
names.
is what makes me want
Hold on. Listen, there are some names that you know are black, right? There are some names that could be white or black, right? They're like, that's the point, is that when you see the name that can only be black, that you will look at it and you say, this has to be a black person, this is when the bias comes in. And the assumption is that they are lower class and less educated because they have the black name. And it is true, like that is more likely. It is correct though.
It's
like,
not true.
It is. Black people
You just
are
keep
disproportionately
positively
poor.
asserting that.
The black people are disproportionately poor and disproportionately less educated. Do you disagree with that?
Sure, I think that's true.
Okay, that's my point, is when you look at the name,
No, that's not the point. That's not the point. You're conflating things, right?
Yes,
You're
you
saying
are.
because there are names that we traditionally, yes, it is true that certain, like for example, Jorge would be a name that we would consider as more Hispanic sounding than white sounding, because a bunch of people moved to this country from different ethnicities and adopted more of the names that traditionally would sound like Anglo names or European names and things like that. That doesn't mean that your claim is true, though. You're saying that there are names outside the bounds of what white people normally name their kids, and we assume all of those names are poor. But the reality is that it could be that people assume those names are poor or strange or something like that because they are abnormal names, and it has nothing to do with their skin color.
This
which
is why
if we
I
wanted
really
to,
want you to know what
which is
validity
why
means.
which is why if we wanted to control to make sure that we're focused purely on race with not hiring rather than strange sounding names, we would have names that are strange sounding that are white, like
But
Bubba
I
Ray
agree with
and
you.
things
I
like that. But
agree
they
with
didn't
you,
do
though,
those
Rob.
studies.
Hold
One at a time,
on.
one at a
I
time.
agree with you, though, that Bubba Ray would have the same outcome. I agree with that. I agree that you look at a name and you infer class and education. But when you
Tom,
look at names that can only be black, you automatically infer that class and education.
I have to ask
I
you
have
a
2 points to
hypothetical
make
then.
this
I have to ask you a
before I-
hypothetical.
No, okay.
Tom, and I'll kick it back over to you, Jangles. I'm sorry. Tom, if we were to do this study in reverse, let's say, okay, and we found that there was an equal amount of whites, let's say, who were not hireable based on these white Southern sounding names like Bubba Ray, things like this. Would you infer then that that would be systemic racism?
Sure. Yeah. Let's say yes.
You,
But again, hold on.
I mean,
You
this
guys
is
are
insane.
hold on. You guys are
Yeah, this is
ignoring.
insane then.
Hold on. You guys are ignoring my initial point where I say if white people are the majority and they are going to have more control over more things over the minority, then this is going to affect them much greater than it will white people. So yes, sure, there are some things that apply to white people that will have the same exact problems, and it will be systemic racism. But
so then
it
we
isn't
don't know
going
for
to
sure
have
that
the
it's
same
systemic
effect.
racism in this case, Tom.
What
Hold
do you
on.
mean?
I just
Go
need
ahead,
to get in here.
Jangles. Go ahead.
Oh, let's get back to Jangles.
I desperately need to get in here. So the most famous, remember, I cited a meta-analysis, 55,000 studies, and I tried to explain what scientific validity means, but all for naught. So the most famous of those studies is, are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal, a field experiment on labor market discrimination? Just based on the names alone, are y'all familiar with this study? Does that ring a bell?
That's
I
the one
believe
that
I've
I was
heard this
talking
study.
about.
Okay, Lakeisha and Jamal, yeah. So they found little evidence. They did control for the thing that you're looking for.
No, they didn't.
Yes, they
So
did.
if I'm looking at that study right now, and in the abstract of that study that I have highlighted, that if they were to say, we also find little evidence that employers are inferring social class from the names, if I were to read that sentence out loud, and you just said that they didn't control for social class, would that make you
Tell
incorrect?
us how they did it.
Tell us how they did it. Oh man, The burden of proof. Look at the burden of proof. Y'all have provided
It's on
no
you,
evidence,
not on us.
no studies. Y'all have provided no studies whatsoever.
Why do we need to? It's the burden of proof on you to prove systemic racism. That's your position.
And if I may,
It's
we're
never gonna be
actually,
good enough.
so I could continue to provide, I've given at least 2 examples of, 3 examples so far I've
I
given.
don't know how they
given
could
up
So
some
real quick,
stories.
now, real quick, if I may. So what we have given is 3 examples, and we could give litany more of actual
3
systemic
anecdotes.
racism. Please, Jangles, I know it's difficult for you.
No,
What we have provided was multiple examples of literal writing into law and writing into policies of literal systemic racism against Asian Americans, against white Americans, etc.
What was the law?
All of the examples.
That wasn't interrupted. What was the law?
Could you please
I-
be
it was-
quiet?
it was
You can't
clarified. What
control
was the
yourself.
law?
You
What was
can't
the law?
control.
No.
Oakland,
If you want to
okay,
do it,
laws or policies
knock
such as
yourself
Oakland
out. That's why I
trying to
blocked
give
you on
money,
Twitter. I don't want to
right,
associate with it. But if
people
you
based
want
on
to be on
skin
Twitter,
color,
I
such
think
as
you're
the
there
Biden
right
administration
now.
giving poor
Oh, fuck,
black
I thought I
farmers
did.
money
My
that they
bad.
weren't giving
If you
poor white
want to do
farmers,
it,
such as Yale and other Ivy League schools that are intentionally making it harder for white people and Asian Americans to get in, right? Such as the CDC that I mentioned that recommended giving out the virus or giving out the vaccine to a population that would include more black people, even though that meant, according to their own estimate, that up to 6% more people
can
could
do
die.
it.
But
That's
they said
fine.
it was
By
worth
the
it
way,
because in that
don't
6%
get me brought
population,
up.
it was more
Don't get me
disproportionately
brought
black.
up.
These are literal things. The things that you all are talking about aren't literal codification in law that we could see in black and white says we should benefit white people over black people. It's all, well, we did a study, and this study suggests that there's a small chance that people with white sounding names, and again, you say they did control for it. Again, they did not control for it in this study. If they did control for it,
says it.
they would they might have said it, but they don't give you the example of how they did it. And let me show you why.
They do. That's why they said it.
Please, Jangles, let me finish my point.
No,
if
if
they
you just
did,
stop fucking
they would
lying,
have
I'll
done
let you
this.
finish.
If they did, just because they said it, this is how they could have did it. They said, we then compared the black names of Anthony and Sarah to the white names of Destiny and Bubba Ray and saw what the callback numbers were. They chose not to do that.
They chose not to do that. You're saying that because you were incorrect about the assumptions. You're just making assumptions about the study that you have not read. You have.
I
not
have
read
read
the
the study.
No, you have not read.
I have read the study, and I've read studies that
So let
critique
me-
it for
let me
this
see
very
if I can-
reason.
Very
so
much
let me see
doubt
if I
that.
can pose this hypothetical to you, Jangles. Do you think then, based on these studies, just this particular study even, that even if it provides evidence for systemic racism, that it proves it?
No.
No. Okay, no.
Please, no. Let me explain my answer.
Well, let me finish and
No.
then I'll kick
No.
it back. I'll kick it
I'm not
back.
done. I'm not done with that answer. Because when
Okay.
I say no, I'm trying to be honest. Like no
Right.
study ever no one study ever proves anything. It's a
Right.
piece of evidence. There are
Got
always limitations to studies. This is true in physics.
I know.
Okay, much less something as vastly more complicated with vast like infinitesimal like
You think
infinite
this is vastly more complicated than physics?
Yes, in physics you can nail down variables. What makes something complicated is variables that you have to control for. Hold on, don't laugh. Like in physics, you can control for variables a fuck ton. In like sociology, there are so many external variables
That's right.
and not control for. That's why it's way more complicated. I didn't say it was harder
Got it.
or it was like
so,
more.
so let's try this again.
So
Even if you're saying that these are
Wait,
good,
wait.
even if you're saying that these
Andrew,
are
wait,
good,
hold on. Andrew, let him
I
finish.
thought he was
I'll be very quick. So just because no single study proves anything,
Right.
okay, there are always limitations. The best you can do, the best you can hope for, is a preponderance of evidence that leads you to a reasonable conclusion. That's
Right.
all I'm looking for.
Got it.
Right?
I understand. But it's totally valid for us to question your evidence when you say it's not proof. What Rob's doing is questioning the evidence. And one of the ways in which
He was
he's
incorrect
questioning the
about
evidence
it.
is saying one of the ways that you can do this is by running these types of sociological experiments in reverse and seeing how much the results differ. And because that's not being done, that looks to us like bias.
That looks so because they didn't include a separate variable in this study, that makes them biased against that variable.
No, not a separate variable in this study. How about just another study that literally does the exact same thing? It's just controlling for everything in the reverse instead. And then we could maybe compare the two and see if we come up with similar results. That seems totally reasonable. to me.
Okay. Here's a reasonable thing. Like, do you want to actually like read the names in this study? Like legitimately.
Sure.
So the reason
I've read this study. Yeah.
So the reason these are valid, the reason this is a valid study in the scientific sense, not in the Twitter sense, you're valid, queen or whatever. Valid means they're measuring what they're saying they're measuring. They measured these names to see if people, if they gave a name that they thought was a black name, but people didn't perceive it as a black name. Well, what they're measuring is perceived racial bias. So they would throw that name out. All right. Because what they're measuring is not what names are black, what names are white, what names are perceived as black and white. So the names, come on. Jesus Christ, there's so many references. Where is it? Fuck, don't do this to me.
But we understand this
to me.
We understand this point. I don't know why you keep hammering this, but we understand it. We totally understand it, right? They're trying to have black sounding names because the variable they're looking for is, are people not being hired because they're black, even if they have equals? What I'm saying is there are other variables that could explain this. You're not just measuring racial bias. You're also measuring bias against people who might not want to hire people with strange or low class sounding names.
So what you're absolutely correct. If names are perceived as being lower class, I have not seen a study, but I would guess that, yeah, there's probably a racial, there's probably a bias against people with poor sounding names. I wouldn't be interested in the research that, but that would definitely happen. But what you don't understand is this does not disprove that there's racial bias. Again, hold on. Why do the only names that are identifiably black, why are those names associated with poor people? I want you to answer that question.
Because it's not that they're associated with poor people, it's that they're associated with sounding different. Because these names sound different, they could also sound poor. The same thing would be, why is the name Bubba Ray or Cletus or Jethro, why are these names associated with poor and white? Does that prove bigotry against white people?
Jamal, Tyrone, Aisha, Keisha, Latoya. These are not weird names to me, all right? They're not, it's not because they're different. It's not because they're unique. It's because that they're associated with black people. They measured that. No, they measured. They didn't measure, they didn't just measure, do these names sound different? It's, do they sound identifiably black? That's why this research was
and it could even be that it proves, well, at least provides good evidence, solid evidence for your point of systemic racism. But it also may not provide great evidence for systemic racism.
And here's the problem.
But the what ifs you've given are very weak.
But again, here's what we're saying. Please, sorry.
No, I'll let you go, man.
And what we're saying is all of these things, right? And it goes down the line. All of the things that you could hear. I know we've only gotten to two aspects, but it constantly comes down to, well, this could suggest that there's systemic racism, right? And again, if there's definitive proof that something's systemically racist, it's something that we need to work on. We need to talk about solutions. But again, in the inverse, we can see that we're literally suggesting policies that literally are codifying systemic racism, and we don't need studies, right? For example, we saw Mayor, I could go all day with these examples. Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, says she will no longer be interviewed by white journalists. You know, we see a pledge from STEM fields promising to hire up to 1 million more black people based solely on the color of their skin. We see job fields in Fortune 500 companies constantly that are asking for, we are looking to hire a person of color.
Lightfoot was sued. If it was systemic racism, she wouldn't be able to get away with that. She was sued. The system is working against her.
Yeah, and the reporter thing is an anecdote. It's not a system.
No, it's certainly a system when people in positions of power are prioritized. Of course it is.
It's only a problem if they get away with it. She didn't.
Okay, but they attempted, and did she lose the lawsuit?
Just attempt.
Did she lose the lawsuit? Real quick, did she lose the lawsuit?
Based on, this is a story from May 28th. I don't know.
Right. So then you can't say that she got away with it. We don't know that. Right? She suggests
getting away with it would not being sued.
We're literally talking about a system. Again, like you look at the stimulus bill that was passed by Joe Biden. In that bill, it literally says that people that are farmers that make below a certain amount of money are entitled to a small amount of money. Except if they're black, then they're entitled to, I believe it's up to 120% of the debt that they owe on their farm. Now that's specifically for black people. We have programs like this constantly. And we actually have people that are saying the quiet part out loud, like Ibram Kendi, that are saying the only solution to the systemic racism of the past is active systemic racism that goes the other way today.
You already agreed with that. You already agreed with that. I asked you in the beginning, if there is systemic racism, would we want to do the inverse to correct this, specifically targeting black people? And you guys both said yes.
If it could be proven, then we would agree with that.
But hold on. Let me just say this. If these people feel as though it's proven, then yes, they are doing the opposite to target those black people in the inverse.
Okay, I misunderstood the question then. I thought you meant, should we revoke the policy that's racist? Yeah. That doesn't mean that if we find that the country's been racist to black people, then we have to have the country be racist to white people.
If I take $5 from you, should I not give it back to you? Or should I just say, well, no more $5 exist?
Okay, well, all four of us here, do we all identify as white? I don't know people's ethnicities. Is that something
I
that's true?
identify as white, yes.
Cool. How many black people did you steal money from?
I didn't. I am not. No, hold on. That's not what I said. That's not. I didn't say.
Yes, you said if you stole $5 from me, should you have to give it back?
The royal. That's what you said. Hypothetical.
No, you said that the hypothetical is if I personally or you personally steal from someone, should I give it back? My point is, we're white. We didn't steal from anyone.
Right. So
why does the hypothetical matter?
No, the hypothetical matters because you want to just give those things back to the person, not from white people. Hold on, not from white people. I'm not saying white people did this to black people. I'm not saying that like white people are evil or white people were racist and they screwed over black people. I'm saying systems applied these things. Our country allowed it to happen, and us as a country should rectify it, but not white people.
Okay. Let me give this example here. Let's say this hypothetical. Let's say we have two people, right? And we'll say Bob, and he's black, and Will, and he's white. So B for black and W for white, right? And both of them are born in very similar situations. Bob's born in 1984 to a single mother who makes $20,000 a year. He's black. His family went through Jim Crow, went through slavery. And because of that, he has a single mother that makes $20,000 a year. Will's born in the bed right next to him. Will's born to a single mother who makes $20,000 a year. He's white. Will's family didn't go through Jim Crow. His family worked at the steel mines. Through globalization and things like that, they lost their job. As a result, Will's born to the exact same situation with a mother who makes $20,000 a year. Why should we have programs to help Bob because he's black, but not Will because he's white?
Do you think that that's how systems work?
Yes.
No.
Yeah, okay, for example, then you...
But I laid this out at the beginning.
Real quick. If that's true, then Oakland, California didn't recommend giving money to people because they're black. Then Joe Biden's stimulus bill that gave millions of dollars to black farmers didn't occur.
Well, hold on. Hold on. Those things were like a type of reparations. I don't agree with reparations. This is completely different. It's not. It doesn't have to do with systemic racism. So in the beginning, just let me lay this out one more time.
Okay.
In the beginning, I said that like these are systems like businesses, laws, and culture, and all of them intermingle. One affects the other. So if you are affecting people to be poor, this is going to, or if the laws are affecting businesses and the businesses are affecting black people or making them poor, then that will make their culture worse, which kind of makes it a cycle and it to continuously never end.
So let me ask this question. Let's assume for a second that myself and Rob, we don't. Well, let's just say that we accept your framework and accept that these studies are absolutely true, and we take them as consequential proof that they are true, and that they do prove that systemic racism within the confines of these small systems exist. What do you propose that we do about them?
Well, that's why in the beginning I said I wanted to stay out of solutions, because I think that me and Jangles would disagree on solutions. Specifically. Okay, here, go ahead.
Well, just like how systemic racism doesn't have to be like explicitly against black people, target black people with laws, like make it racially explicit. It's just perpetuating problems in the past.
I can't hear you that well, man.
Hello? Hello?
No, I mean I can hear you, but you're just like, maybe you can turn your mic up a little bit.
Yeah,
I think you
were fine. You leaned back a little. Just get closer.
Okay,
that's
cool.
all. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just like systemic racism is not the result of explicitly racist laws, anti-black laws that are like written into the law, their solutions can be that way too. There can be things that, just like there are things that disproportionately harm black people that we would put under that umbrella of systemically racist, there are things that can disproportionately help black people that we can like put forward. The problem is that white people have been largely opposed to solutions that might help black people if they perceive that black people are going to be the primary beneficiaries. For example, there's, I'm sorry to say it, study. White people see that that our welfare policy is going to primarily benefit black people. They're way more likely to be against it versus a similar welfare policy that's primarily going to benefit white people. Now, why does that matter? If something is not going to hurt you, but it's going to help another group of people, why would you be against helping another group of people? I'm saying like things like welfare. Things like welfare is going to disproportionately help a lot of black people. Things like increasing the educational. Okay, well, no, the people still try to fight against it. Okay, they try to fight against it so much.
But wait, real quick. Didn't you make the argument as long as it happens, then they've won, so it's not systemic racism? That's what you said with Lightfoot. Right, with Lori Lightfoot, you said, well, she lost in a court case, and therefore
you think an individual example of one person is the same as like talking about an entire system, an entire policy?
No one said that. I'm saying that. Real quick, let me explain. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, please, like you keep getting like emotional and stuff. It's not a good look for you. Anyways, what I said was, your point on this point specifically, when I brought up Lori Lightfoot, yeah, there is a separate point of whether one person and things like that illustrate a system or not. But the second point that you made on that was the fact that it didn't succeed proves that it's not systemic racism. So your argument then would also apply to the fact that there are people against welfare, but we have welfare through our systems. How is that evidence of systemic racism then?
Because there's a lot of evidence to say that white people broadly are against welfare if they perceive it as like.
But it happens.
And this is there's historical evidence for this. White people loved welfare when it was not going to affect black people, when it was only going to help white people. White people loved it back in the 20s and 30s and all that fun stuff, trying to help them out of an economic recession. But the second that black people started to become more eligible for welfare based on a complex series of programs, the second that black people started to become the primary beneficiaries somehow, and maybe with some added like messaging from like maybe Ronald Reagan, like putting up this like myth of the welfare queen that like said, hey, black people are just lazied up on welfare and they're like getting lobster dinners and getting way too much money because they're exploiting the welfare system. For some reason, white people stopped supporting these systems that do not benefit black people. They benefit poor people who happen to be disproportionately black.
Got it.
Sure.
So in your estimation, are these white people opposed to it consciously or unconsciously?
I don't know. I don't care.
Got it.
There's not a clean separation. There's not a clean separation.
And that's fine. It's not a trick question. Okay, it's not a trick question. I'm just asking.
It's not a straight binary.
So hang on, let me finish, man.
Into the question.
I've let you go on for like hours here, and I've barely interjected. So just give me a second to cross-examine your position here, if you don't mind. Okay? So first and foremost, when we're looking at this, I ask you for solutions. You say increase welfare. What else do you want to do as far as solutions to what you consider the systemic racism problem based on the evidence that you're looking at?
It was really weird that I was giving off solutions and I was interrupted. So
I'm not interrupting you.
So I will admit, however weak that makes me look, that economics are not my forte. All right, I look at biomechanics, I look at like trans issues, and I look at like racism issues. Economics are not my forte. I am amenable to any sort of positions that helps poor people. Now, it happens to be that poor people are disproportionately, not numerically, but disproportionately of black, Hispanic, I don't think Asian, black and Hispanic. I'm very amenable to those positions, and they will help disproportionately peoples of color. However, we also cannot end that racism is not a factor. There's a ton of evidence, regardless of how like you trying to keep like finding exception to it. There's the vast preponderance of evidence heavily suggests that race still does play a factor, and it might not be old school racism. It might be that post hoc system justification type of racism. So we cannot leave race out of it. We cannot say that race cannot be considered as a factor. So it's a complex. It depends on the locality. It depends on the state. It depends on a wide range of factors.
You keep on regurgitating the same shit. Do you have solutions to this or not?
Do I have like concrete solutions? Does a nobody YouTuber have solutions to systemic racism?
Like
in America? You know what? No, I'll take that L.
How do you say, look, I've been studying
that L.
I've been trying to make sure that I have good concrete evidence based on all of these studies that systemic racism exists, but I never thought past that part to what we would ever fucking do about it if it was.
I mean, normally each individual system is going to need an individual fix, right? So when we talk about like welfare, saying that welfare can make it, if black people are disproportionately on welfare and welfare incentivizes parents to only have a single parent within the household, which is an indicator, a large indicator for success within America, then I would want to fix the one part on welfare that makes it to where it incentivizes the parents to only keep one parent
in
within the household.
In a real-time example, let's take the stop sign example here, for instance, where we're talking about how the police department is a little bit more likely, let's say we just grant it, that somehow there's some kind of racial biases there for them to pull over people disproportionately based on their skin color. How would you directly deal with that problem? Would it be through direct training? What would it be through?
I would probably make it to where we have cameras and exact like sentencing structures, so that like it's not going to be greater or worse for a black person versus a white person, and the cameras so that we can review things and see whether or not there was some sort of bias there that influenced the police.
Okay, so if I can,
cameras and training.
If I can, right? So one, like when you said sentencing, like sentencing is a completely different thing, right? That's a conversation we could get into, but there's a lot of variables that go into sentencing, and so the proof that it's just you're black, you're sentenced harder, it doesn't look like that. So just focusing on this, like most of these police have cameras, have body cams and things like that. It's not solving the problem, right?
Whoa,
and let me say
that's not what. Hold on, that's not what I said.
It's not.
That's not what I said. I didn't say just having cameras. I said having people reviewing the cameras each time so that you can find out the bias. Or
fair enough. I'm not even opposed to that.
I'm sorry. Let's just give it to you. Hang on.
So go ahead, Jangles. Can you in 30 seconds tell me why I'm incorrect? Go ahead.
Because there are departments with body cameras versus departments without body cameras, and so that's cross sectional, and also pre and post body cameras. The amount of complaints against the police drastically drops when the police adopts body cameras. All right. I don't have
cool. So many police do have it. Okay, yeah, and again, I'm not opposed to the policy. I'm not opposed to the policy. I actually in favor. I think that people should have. It's not that you didn't prove that I was incorrect. Like, so you're telling me that in situations, real quick. So you're telling me right now that you have proof in situations where police department have body cameras that they don't engage in racial bias when pulling people over.
I'm saying that the complaints against them go down dramatically, which heavily
but they still exist.
I know you hate that word. It heavily suggests that they modify their behavior when they know there's going to be some sort of extra.
Anyways, I don't have a problem. So let me get to my point. I'm actually favor having 2 body cameras. That way, if the cop says, "Oh, my body camera malfunctioned," I don't have a problem with that shit. I'm for body cameras. Don't have a problem with that, regardless if it's for systemic racist reasons or just to make sure that our police are behaving properly. Don't have a problem with that. Couple things that there was a lot that was said that I want to talk about. First, when Jangles says it's systemic racism because white people didn't want welfare once they figured out black people had it. Welfare passed, so this is a nonsense point. And secondly, I bet if you polled black people and said, "Hey, the government's going to give these programs to give money out and it's going to go to black people," they'd say, "Cool." And then if they said, "But they're going to get," please, can you please stop interrupting? Everyone lets you finish. Anyone lets you go. Please be quiet, Jangles. It's becoming pathetic, right? I understand you need to interrupt me because you know that if I get to talk and articulate my point, that you're unable to bully your way into it.
Enough. Rob, finish your point, and then we'll move it to Jangles.
Okay. So anyways, so the point is, like, if we then ask black people, said, "Hey, there are the programs that we could give the government and it'll go primarily to black people. Are you for it?" Probably most of them would say yes. If they said primarily it'll go to white people, probably many of them would say no. We wouldn't say that that's evidence of systemic racism. Now, having said that, Jangles actually, I don't disagree with what he said would be the vein of which he would propose a solution. I think that we should have solutions, and we'll heavily disagree on what those are, based on need, not based on immutable characteristic. So if we say there is a portion of people that are below a line that we say we need to send them food or, programs for welfare and things like that, fine. We could disagree on what that line would be and what that would look like, but skin color should not be a factor. And if it's true that black people are disproportionately poor, guess what? Those policies would disproportionately help black people, which I have no problem with. That's absolutely fine. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is both in this debate and in the real world, those aren't the only solutions being offered. As Tom Foolery has said, that he's proposing, if something is racist, to do the inverse, which would literally be racist to the other side. And we see the way this is being done, and not just in policy after policy in the Biden administration and other places. I mean, for God's sakes, look at things like the Green New Deal. This is to fight climate change. And yet in the Green New Deal proposal, it talks heavily about the need to make sure that people in positions of power and boards that are getting subsidies for green energy have minorities in them and things like that. So we're giving you specific examples of systemic racism. Again, look at Yale and how they're accepting people. Look at the money that was given to farmers. Look at how Oakland's giving this money. All of these things are literal racism that we see. If the proposed solutions were everything like you're saying, Jangles, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Okay, the reason I keep interrupting you is because what you do is strawman at the midst of an incredibly long gish gallop. The only way you can make a salient point against me is by misrepresenting my position, and you whine and complain when I try to interrupt you to clarify what my position actually is, so you can't misrepresent it to your audience. I think it is hilariously, I don't know what to call it. Welfare is a binary. It either exists or it doesn't. So I can give you $0, and if I give you $1, you have welfare. Welfare has been achieved. All problems that would have been solved by welfare.
Welfare is kind of a binary. binary, just so you know. Like
Really?
it either exists or it doesn't exist.
Okay, it exists or it doesn't exist. So if you have $1 worth of welfare, well, you have welfare. Shut the fuck
that's
up.
true.
You
But
have
I mean, that's
welfare.
true.
It's
So-
not like welfare is there for a need, and $1 isn't going to.
No, I get it.
fulfill that
I'm
need.
just saying
I know.
that it is a binary in the fact that there is either welfare or there's not
And the
welfare.
thing is, Rob, you would agree with me, okay? Need versus immutable characteristics. What I proposed wasn't based on immutable characteristics. It's let's increase the amount of welfare. It just being there isn't quite enough. I'm sorry to say, but I gave you a study that says that white people are less likely to support, therefore vote for welfare if they think it's going to black people. And so it doesn't matter if the law is not based on immutable characteristics. If people perceive the law as benefiting people based on those immutable characteristics, because racism is not done, as both of you admitted, racism was the vast majority of this country's history. The effects of it are still being felt today. It's just that you perceive that the solutions to that racism is going to disproportionately harm whites, and therefore you're working backwards instead of just saying, no, systemic racism exists, but I don't think the solutions are going to be good. I don't think it's good. I'm not done. It's not good because it's going to hurt.
Sounds like gish galloping again. He's gish galloping and misrepresenting us.
Stronger than you.
Now I'm interrupting. Yeah, I'll take the Jangles tag.
Now because you
gish gallop, misrepresenting.
and because you don't like the solution, you're just going to pretend the problem doesn't exist. It's how conservatives think.
Let me try to one more time, because I was trying to do this, but then we kind of went off on this other tangent.
It's not
to
a tangent,
cross-examine. No, I'm not just talking about you. We've all kind of done it a little bit on the panel, right? I want to be fair with this. I want to grant the argument, right? I don't agree with the argument, but I do want to grant it just to be fair, just to be good faith, right? And I do want to know what these proposed solutions to this issue would be of like stop signs, or what the proposed solution to the issue would be if you're saying, that people aren't hiring based on a name. What do you propose we do about these things, even if they're true? You personally, Jangles.
Personally, I think the two solutions there: increase body cameras to increase community accountability, because that's been proven to work. And although I do not know what the training would be, because I'm admitting that I don't know, I think there's some sort of training to decrease racial bias, to increase like saliency of like, why would you assume that certain things would exist? Like, is it right to assume, to associate like I don't know, certain traits with a car, or certain like traits of how a person, or certain traits with how a person like dresses? Is it incorrect to associate that with like a reasonable way to stop somebody?
Sure. So just to not mischaracterize this at all, right? Cool. I wouldn't be against body cameras on police officers. I think state officials should absolutely be held accountable. I certainly wouldn't be against superior training for police officers. I think state officials should have the best training if they're policing. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. Do you think that race could be a part of that training?
Of course. Of course. Of course. Saying things like you shouldn't racially profile, that should definitely be a part of the training, how racial profiling is done. However, that being said, I think it needs to be done for black officers with whites, for instance, also. I think that needs to be done across the board. I don't have a problem with racial training for public officials in a public capacity. I don't think really anybody does. So I want to dive into more of these solutions, though, right? These are just really, really, really tiny issues that even if we grant them based on these studies, we could probably agree on solutions. I want to know if you think that there's systemic racism built into all of our institutions that are affecting everybody nationwide. And if you do, can you provide evidence for those things, and can you provide solutions to those things based on that evidence?
Is that the standard that you set for when systemic racism exists?
No, it's not a standard. And I'm not saying that you can't have...
Repeat the question again.
Let me finish. I'm not saying you can't specifically have small systems where maybe there's systemic racism. However, I need to be able to take off the table or put on the table that whether or not Jangles thinks that this is a national problem that has infiltrated all of our systems, or if Jangles doesn't think that.
National problem, all systems. I don't think that this is a fair framing of the question. Does it have to infiltrate every single system completely, impact every single individual?
That's not really what I'm saying, though. I'm just saying, do you think that there's a large array of systems nationwide that this is affecting, and can you demonstrate proof that it is? Because right now we seem to be focusing on stupid shit like, okay, hiring versus names and stop sign checks. Fine. Even if I grant you all of that, the solutions you would have for it, we wouldn't even be against. So if we're talking about systemic racism on a micro level, fine. But if we're talking about it on a macro level, can you demonstrate that for me?
I would have loved it if we started here, because I think that's where the real issue is. What are the solutions, and are the solutions worse than the problem? That's a way more interesting conversation, because
Well,
no,
maybe.
hold on. I don't think white people should be punished for instances in the past. I don't think white people should be like targeted for punishment. No, of course not. But we can't have that, because both of you perceive that white people are going to be punished, that it must have like reverse racist laws in order to, like, that's the only proposed solution.
Yeah, but I don't give a fuck about any of that. Can you
backwards?
it on the
You work
macro
backwards
level?
to say that systemic racism isn't real. Now, I've demonstrated there's systemic racism in police stops, 100 million police stops. There's systemic racism
back up.
in
There's systemic
hiring.
racism where?
In police stops, the 100 million, you did not offer a convincing
No,
counter
fine,
argument.
but that's still a micro issue. I'm talking about in a macro sense. Can you describe this phenomenon for me better?
Well, I can't. If I say police stops, that's not every single system, so I have to go like one by one. And so, 100 million stops. There's a racial disparity in police stops. Also, in hiring, so we saw a meta-analysis, 55,000 studies. Black people are less likely to get hired. Also, in criminal sentences, in like juvenile criminal sentencing, police officers are more likely to attribute bad behavior or crimes as to the individual if they are black, and more likely to like systemic family problems if they are white. That's going to drastically affect just like the sentencing issues. There's an issue like if like in an experimental setting, so that if you have the same person, like same crime, two groups of people, if you darken the skin of one, they're going to be more harsh in their sentencing.
So these all sound like to me that they're individualistic small characteristics within a very large system. For instance, even with the police department with the stops, that's really one very small function. Traffic stops that police officers service.
So why are you worried about these problems being addressed?
Because the reason that I worry about this being too heavily applied on the micro level is because I think what the goal is to take the micro level issues where maybe you might have a leg to stand on with these issues and apply them at the macro level and say, this is a national phenomenon. It's a problem in every single institution. It needs to be rooted out everywhere. That's my problem here, Jangles.
Because this kind of confirms what I thought, is that the solution is what you're concerned with, and so you work backwards to say that there's not a problem.
I'm not working backwards. I'm working from a baseline forward.
Yeah, so
the baseline forward would be you're indicating things at a micro level, and I'm trying to expand on that and say, is this actually a macro issue?
Hold on, Jangles. What he's saying is that, like, he could skip over whether or not the problem exists if he agrees on the solution anyways. That, like, he doesn't have to agree to the problem if he likes the solution one way or the other. So, like, that's what he's trying to get to. Yeah.
Okay, that's
one.
Yeah,
that's one aspect of it, but the other aspect of it is I want to know scale. And what we're keep on arguing over is these very, very small demonstrations of micro issues within these vast institutions, which seem like they're very easily correctable. If you're like, well, just body cams and better training, we're like, okay, well, let's do that.
There's an incorrect assumption of what a system is. A system is a network of interactions between actors. There's no such thing as a large system. That is not a thing. It's made up of every single step below it.
Well, that's true.
At the very lowest,
I agree, but they all intersect, right?
They all intersect, and so what I'm describing. What I'm describing. Here's the police. Okay, here's the educational system. Okay, here's the punitive justice system. Okay, here's like here's like employers. You're like want to like say, oh, all those are micro, all those aren't big, all those don't really matter.
No. Stop. I'm not saying that.
There's no way.
I'm saying that within
system.
these very large institutions, you seem to be only able to adjudicate very micro issues within large systems. So the public school system, for instance, maybe you could indicate some style of racial bias there via some kind of study, right? That's okay. We could maybe attack that particular issue. But do you think that this system as a whole, this massive, large system that is the public school system in general, is systemically racist or not?
I think one, it's not a binary. All right. If let's say we proved definitively 100%, you would agree with it, that black students are treated 3% worse in whatever metric than white students. Would you call that systemically racist?
Maybe.
See, it's not this binary. If it's
maybe, but let's just say I did. So what?
So let's propose a small solution to help fix that.
Yeah, a small solution within this massive system that shows that maybe within the confines of this system, there might be some small biases, which we've already agreed literally from the outset that we would be okay if you found such biases in going ahead and fixing them if your solutions are such like, well, traffic cams are fine, right?
So I'm really curious why you were both fighting so hard against me specifically. If we agree that these biases exist, but the solutions are like,
I didn't say that we agree on the baseline that even these biases exist, but if I can move past it and just grant the argument and look at it, right, it almost doesn't seem like you're really saying that systemic racism is really this massive institutional problem.
Does it have to be a massive problem for it to matter?
It's a series of micro problems that you're associating.
Micro problems that can be contributed to a bigger macro issue. Why is that so hard to comprehend?
Correct.
If I may,
it's not hard to comprehend.
If I may, so the reason that this is important, right, is because we see the tenor of the national conversation and we see the things that are being done. So, for example, I've had debates with people where we'll talk about the massive amounts of riots we saw after George Floyd's death, and almost all of those debates, people will admit, well, it's not just that people are angry about George Floyd's; it's systemic racism in general that they're mad at. And then when you get down to brass tacks, it's like, well, what is it? Well, there's this study that says that blacks are 10% more likely to be pulled over in traffic stops. So we have $2.2 billion of riots to respond to that. We have people saying that the country is systemically racist at the national and political level, saying how evil and racist this country is, saying that we need to teach this more, how evil and racist. And so we could see that in the real world, and not just randos that are online. Please, Jangles.
It is.
We see, and that's why BPF does a great job here, because even in the context of this debate, and this is exactly what usually happens, we could quibble about a few of these micro things that you're talking about, but the grand scale things and the way that this is being applied in the real world is on a grandiose scale that's calling for all sorts of insane things that are being done. And it's basically ushering in this sort of cultural Marxist agenda that they have, that they're using these micro things as an excuse for. Again, you only buttress my argument by your ridiculous your reactions. And the last thing I'll say, just real quick, that I want to say, what I want to say real quick is one of the things that they talk about was welfare. We know that this is the truth, right? There will never, give me the figure. I'll leave either Tom or Jangles. Give me the figure. How much money do we need to put in welfare? Give me the top estimate that we could say, okay, systemic racism is no longer a problem.
I wasn't saying that put more money into it. I was saying change the system to where it doesn't incentivize single parent households so that it would help change the culture.
That's something we would agree on. But when we're talking about like welfare, Jangles specifically said welfare. The truth is, we all know that there is no amount. If we just gave $5 trillion in reparations, real quick, if we just said, we know the truth is, if we listened to people and they said, okay, here's the figure we came up with, $5 trillion in reparations given to the black community, that would be able to solve it. Within 3 months, there would be a problem that we saw, like violence in inner city Chicago, and they'd say, you know what the problem is here? Systemic racism.
So here's what happens in all of these conversations from my perspective. It doesn't matter how many studies you get out. If you are honest about how these studies are presented and you actually know how
granted them,
we literally granted them. No, you didn't.
Yeah, we did.
Debate. No, for a hypothetical, over the course of the debate,
out the solution.
Over the course of the debate, you kept poking holes in these studies because you did not understand how scientific studies.
We don't even need to.
There is no amount of evidence that I could present.
We granted them, Jangles.
You're so arrogant.
I'm so arrogant because I know more than you.
We granted
I'm an idiot in everything else.
We granted them just for the sake of.
So what happens in every single one of these is the conservatives will not accept any sort of proof for anti-black racism. But you know what is proof of anti-white racism? You know what is proof of systemic racism? One mayor saying a stupid thing and then getting sued for it. That's proof of anti-white.
Is that what I did? Is that what I said? One example? Is that what I said?
A series of anecdotes, like 9 anecdotes. That's nothing in the.
I gave real quick. So what I gave was what I gave was this.
What is anti-white racism is on the floor. You could ice skate over the bar for anti-white or reverse racism.
Okay, so what I gave
evidence that you can provide for these people,
right?
No amount of evidence, no amount of studies, no amount of historical context that directly builds a through line between systemic racism, Jim Crow laws, nothing that no amount of historical context given.
Jangles.
That's what happens in every single conversation I have.
Granted them for the sake of argument.
You did not.
Literally granted them for the sake of argument, and what we found was that your solutions are all based on the micro level. And so what Rob Noerr
is a micro level?
What
micro?
Yeah, of course. What Rob is saying.
What's macro? What the fuck is macro?
Please, Jangles, could you please be quiet and leave someone else? Thanks.
What is macro?
What Rob is very specifically saying, okay, is that look, these people want to make these vast changes to solve a problem that you can't demonstrate is really a large-scale systemic issue, and you can only demonstrate these really, really tiny examples of this, which if we look at the solutions for the tiny examples of these things, we literally agree on them. So Rob's like, why do they want all these fucking massive changes countrywide to address these really, really small issues that you can point to?
And what I would say is, talk to them. Do you think that this is why I like the way Rob Noerr debates?
That's why I asked you what your
Rob Noerr debates
solution
is.
was.
I'm not. It doesn't matter if I'm here. I'm just a representative for the
That's
left.
why I asked you, Jangles, what Jangles
Well,
said.
no,
and
but
what I said was, hey, welfare's a good one. White people tend to not support welfare policies.
Good,
or
let's
tend to
talk about welfare.
Hold on. White people tend to not support welfare policies when they think that it's going to disproportionately benefit black people.
So
This
what would
seems
be
like
the
a concern
solution
to
to
me.
that?
Please,
like,
PPF, I want to respond to him here.
Hold on,
personally.
though. I
it's-
just want to throw this out there. I just want to throw this out there.
Tom, I
Just
have
one
something
second.
important to say, but go ahead.
Okay,
I
wait.
will just
No,
throw
you
this
don't.
in there.
Chris.
This is the reason that I said, like, as long as we agree to systemic racism, I think that we could have our own solutions. I think that we could actually probably have better solutions from the right, and that, like, we wouldn't have to give in to whatever you consider the left radical solutions. We would be able to agree to a problem without having to hand the narrative over to whatever it is that you're afraid of.
Okay, if I can, real quick, I'll respond to you and then Jangles real quick. Tom, but the problem with your stance in this debate is you've acknowledged there's systemic racism against every race and that everything could be proof of systemic racism. So what's the debate supposed to be?
I said
right?
that
So
it's
that's the
greater for black people, though, because we are the majority. The effect is much worse on black people. Do you disagree with that?
You haven't demonstrated it.
Well, no, do you disagree with that? Like, because we are the majority,
Well, it's on you to demonstrate it, though, Tom. You're making the claim.
No, I did demonstrate it.
Oh,
No,
and
you never
would either of you
demonstrated
disagree
that.
with the fact that people think that white is default in America? Would either of you disagree with that?
No, I think that's probably true. It's
So
the
people
most
think that
common.
white is
Yeah.
default. Do you think that there can be
Well, what do you mean
instances
default?
of,
Do you mean the majority?
In the
I mean,
majority,
when you
basically.
think of an American, you think of a white person.
Yeah.
Like, what is like an average American you think of a white person? Is that fair?
No, I don't think of an average American as being a white person, but if you're
So
saying
why
you're the
do you-
majority,
so it
I
doesn't
don't
matter?
disagree.
So
I mean, majority, yeah. But again,
if I presented a study saying that, you wouldn't be interested in it,
to respond to Jangles, so Jangles was starting to say, the problem I have with you,
right.
Rob, is you talk about, I'm making arguments here, and I'm not the Democrats or I'm not the people out in the real world. So you shouldn't be making those arguments, right? That's what you were saying the problem is.
What is the
You might
purpose
as well
of
not
having
be
me
here.
No, I need to ask
Right.
you, what is the purpose of having me here? Do you want me to answer
right.
for all these imaginary people in your mind? Do you want me to answer for
listen,
your
part
imaginary
of the debate
version of what a Democrat is?
Listen, please. So part of the debate is discussing what's going on and the solutions being proposed in the real world by people with power. And I could prove that Jangles thinks this, right? Because why are me and Big Papa Fascist here when you keep saying the majority of white people are against these programs if it thinks it goes against black people? Well, that's not me and Big Papa Fascist. No, but nonetheless, I have proof of what the people out in the real world are doing in response to what they call systemic racism. It's not just anecdotes, it's proof. It's not just anecdotes, it's proof. And again, this is
By definition, it would be because he has proof.
Right. We have proof of it. And I just want to say this real quick. So it shows the absurdity because all of us here understand, like, I respect everyone here. I think we're all intelligent people. We're having fun debating this issue, but it's also important to talk about
I don't
the
know
people
about
with
this
actual...
Jangles guy, Rob.
Hey, I am having fun.
He's got a high opinion of himself, that's for sure. But what we need to focus on is what's being done in the real world by people in positions of power that are making these arguments. And that's arguably more important. So I would think that Jangles, I would think your position would be this. Well, Rob, I even said, I was like, I agree with a lot of the proposed solutions you're saying. We should have solutions not based on race, but based on need. And we would disagree on exactly, as with Tom, I think we would disagree on what those solutions might look like in the or in the microcosm, but we agree with that that's the way it should be done, right? The problem is, why aren't you then actively speaking out to the people that are making your argument, yes, there's systemic racism, and then saying things like, all cops are bastards, 1619 Project, like, why aren't you speaking out against them? That's my question.
Are you speaking out against the people who think that black people are inherently inferior?
Yes.
Like it's just black
Yes,
people?
all the time.
Yes,
All the time. Watch my channel.
Cool. Have you ever? It's cool. I made an entire video speaking out against those people who think that like every single problem is
Yeah,
like,
but so
the
what?
systems.
That doesn't really
So
address
what?
the point.
Wait,
That
have
was
you
the
done
question.
this? Yes, I have done this.
No, you haven't done
What the
that.
fuck?
What he's saying is, why aren't you going after the people who are making national prescriptions to problems you can't prove
That's what
exist?
he's
Because
saying.
idiots on Twitter screaming ACAB are not important to me, or they're not as important to me as like the vast preponderance of evidence
we
saying
can't
that
make good
white
faith
people
that
are
you
like
didn't.
really, really scared that white people are about to become a minority in this country. And despite the fact that white people totally aren't racist, they're very, very scared of the fact that white people are set to become a minority. Now, all right, I need to ask you: is there a non-racist reason why white people would be concerned largely that white people are about to become a minority in this country? We're going to have a
Yes, I could give that.
Cool,
I'll give that. Right, I'll give that by asking a question back to you. Do you think that black people have a right to be concerned because they're not the majority?
No.
Okay,
Wait,
then why do they?
What?
Do you think that that's why black people are concerned in this country? Is that a gotcha? Do you think that maybe
Yes.
it's just minority status?
Yes.
Nothing
Yes.
else.
Yes.
Of
Hold on,
course.
just because they're a numerical minority. That's why you think black people are concerned in this country.
Or it's
I
the
think that
effects
out
of
loud
the
right
right
now.
I think that.
I
I
want you to
think
say
that.
it out loud. Say those exact words, please.
Right, I'll tell you what I think. I think that black people are concerned because they're a numerical you even just said it. Is white the default? Why does that matter? Because you're implying that the fact that white is seen as a default is a problem for people that aren't that default. That's literally the implication of what you say. Yes, it is.
Oh my God, you're okay.
So you
Calm
guys.
down a little bit.
So wait a second.
Wait,
I
wait,
can
wait,
address
wait. That was
easily.
amazing.
I can
Wait,
address
wait,
my
wait,
God,
hold
that
on,
was amazing.
Andrew, hold on really quick. We're gonna let Jangles respond, and
Okay.
then just have one last response, and then we're gonna go to Q&A, and then we'll do
Okay.
closing statements after that. So just
Sure.
and start to wind this down.
Fuck it. It's a numerical minority. That's why you were like red-haired people are a numerical minority. I guess they're like terrified. It's not the vast history associated with that. That's incredible to me. I'm glad you said that out loud with your mouth where people could hear. So no, white people are concerned about becoming a racial minority largely because they are used to a certain status quo and they're anxious about that status quo being changed. I don't think that makes them evil, but it does mean they're more likely to support policies that are going to disproportionately harm people of color to hopefully keep them down while white people stay on top of things. This even includes poor white people who are wonderful. Most of my relatives are poor white people, and about 30% of them are worth like being human beings. That's a joke. Okay.
Then why would the position of white people be to bring in 1 million immigrants a year, literally replacing their own demographic, Jangles?
Hold on. Do you think that that's like where the main source is? No, people like white people aren't having as many babies,
And they're being
Non-white people are
replaced
having
with
more.
immigrants that they're bringing into the tune legally of a
Would you say it's a good or a great
Jangles?
replacement?
1 million. 1 million.
It's just absurd. Like you constantly see this,
You didn't
right?
answer
Like the
the question,
idea
by the way.
whites are
That doesn't
whites are
answer the
default.
question. They
I did answer the question. The problem is that blacks are concerned about being the minority because they feel that will mean that because they're
No,
in the minority that
incorrect.
the majority will. They
Incorrect.
believe that. Would you please stop before I even finish
Black
saying
people
that
do
I'm
not see
incorrect?
racism as a zero-sum game. You have to stop being
very poor.
incorrect.
You're a very poor etiquette debater, and you're not very intelligent despite your arrogance
I'm
as well.
much
So
smarter
again,
than
if you'd let me
I've
finish my
proven that
point, which I have to
in
keep doing, like if you'd let me finish
Also,
my
I'm
point
more
again,
handsome.
if you would please let me finish my point again. Black people are concerned because their status as a minority in this country, it allowed people that were seen as the majority to pass laws that negatively impacted them. And if you and the fact that you say white people are the default,
The fact that you
right,
think
they're
it's just
considered the default,
numerical
please,
minority.
I
That's
don't
it.
think it's just
Please
numerical
keep saying
minority.
that.
You're
Please keep
misrepresenting.
saying
You're
that.
misrepresenting what I'm saying.
Say it
I'm saying they
multiple
feel that
times.
because they're a numerical minority, that the laws and the positions of people in power will be not advantageous to them. Because if they are a majority, then they would say, oh, now that we're the majority, we could rectify these wrongs, or we could pass laws that we're the majority. And furthermore, the fact that you make this, well, white is the default, proves that you think that there's something inherent about white being default that is worth
No, it's 'cause
focusing
they
on,
have
that
a
people of
study
color.
on this.
Lastly, the last thing I'll say real quick, again, like it's hard, it's really, I think we're doing a great job keeping our train of thought as some lunatic just yells every time we say something. But the last thing I'll say about this, you keep talking about white people specifically, and this is the argument Big Papa Fascist gets to, show me any race, and I bet they would be in favor of policies that benefited their race.
Okay. Actually, Jangles, I would love to get you on a debate on this topic about white people becoming the minority.
I actually want to. Yeah,
I would love to debate this too.
Maybe I would debate it with someone not Jangles. It seems to be kind of a waste.
I know. I'm sick of like not being. Okay.
Well, you have to stop.
you guys-
That's it.
Bro, you have to stop taking crack.
Yeah, you
before
guys
do
are doing
it.
great.
Do you think that like some people just don't talk fast?
I took that.
Was that like the best joke you could come up with?
I mean, I'm serious.
What's that noise in the background? Todd, is that you?
It's Todd.
Okay. Cute. All right. Well, we're gonna get to the Q&A, guys, because I think. But I do want that to be.
It's been fun. It's been fun.
All right. So I'll do some of the super chats first. The questions are cut off, so anything else, if you haven't gotten them in, they will have to be super chats. So from Layman, why does the name Big Papa Fascist sound like a gay leather daddy?
Are you fishing? Get the fuck out of here.
Okay. So from Funnel, so, East Asian outperform Malaysian in Malaysia. The opposite is true with whites and blacks in America. I don't know if that's a question. All right. And it seems like the super chats tend to be troll questions, you guys, but I'm going to read them anyways. Jangles, the soy rage will go away if you just work out a little, man.
I don't think it will. I would like to believe that, but I think the soy rage is going to be within me forever.
I don't know what's wrong with you, man. You got to calm down during these things.
A lot of things. I
love it. Whatever. I like the fieriness. So
calm down, Jangles. Jesus.
Right,
I'm just so correct and handsome.
Okay. So, anyways, from Thomas Wayne. How do 4 white men think they know what's better for minorities?
Oh, brother. Okay. Yeah, I don't give a crap what color you are. I don't give a crap if you're black, white, Asian. I don't think that you can read studies better than I can based on the color of your skin. You may be able to give like personal anecdotes so that we can better understand how these effects like limit you in your daily life, but you cannot explain a system better than I can just because you are black. I hate the identity politics that people bring into these things where they're like, well, I'm a trans woman, so I can tell you the science behind being trans. No, that doesn't make sense. You being trans doesn't make you a scientist. And it's the same with systemic racism or anything else. Your color of skin does not make it to where you can read data, read studies, or understand economics or any of these things. It's just a ridiculous question.
I would probably disagree with that a little bit, and there's some nuance there, but, you know, if you would like me to...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You guys can all answer it if you want.
Yeah, so like anecdotes are not data, but it does provide like numbers are numbers, right? Like it doesn't provide context. You need to like, in order to make people care about something, it helps to hear some stories. And yeah, I think just by virtue of not having these experiences, I think that like if you are gay, you're probably going to know more about what it's like to be gay than someone straight, just in terms of probability. It's not like an automatic assumption, but yeah, if you live in Nevada, you probably know what Nevada's like more than someone who was born and raised and never left Montana. So I think there's something to that. It's not an either or thing. That's a big problem in politics now. It's like all or nothing. There's no nuance. It's only binary. Like welfare exists or it doesn't. No other conversations. But yeah.
The questioner is indicative of one of the major problems in this country that says that identity is the prima facie thing that we should look at. We try to fill, like, for example, we could see in the Biden administration, they constantly try to fill positions based on, we need a woman of color. Oh, we need an Asian here. This stuff is nonsense. We should be having people, anyone should be allowed to talk about any of these things, and your qualifications and merits should be more important than your identity.
Joe, did you want to answer it?
I mean, could 4 black people talk about white racial issues when whites become the minority? I don't really understand the concept there. I don't really care. I don't think it's a good faith question.
All right. So, you know, what's funny is the one who asked it is somebody who would say that systemic racism doesn't exist. Yeah.
They're saying that like because we're white, we shouldn't be trying to explain systemic racism.
Yeah.
They're probably trolling.
Yeah. By the way, I don't associate with white. I'm Irish, so that's that.
I'm Native American, so
sure.
And I don't
whatever the hell we want to be.
Yeah. Right.
I'm from my dad's penis.
Yeah, right.
You too.
So from the Hammerite. Here is the question: If there are no systemic, people need to write these better. If there are no systemic racists, why in the last 100 years blacks slowly lost all their accumulated wealth after abolishment of slavery?
Well, actually, we kind of touched on that pretty well. Rob and myself both acknowledge that there was systemic and institutional racism nationwide. And I even gave an outline in my opening for how long that lasted. We understand that that was horrific and that was awful, and that has ramifications even to this day. That really was never in dispute, and that really wasn't what the argument here was about.
Right. In addition, we could see, like, again, one of the things that we didn't get to talk about, but that I said in my opening, we have to see if the policies that have been issued in an attempt to fight systemic racism have actually caused problems that they didn't foresee. So even Tom suggested this. Like, for example, I talked about the Moynihan report that showed that in '64, before the civil rights movement, before the war on poverty, which the war on poverty was supposed to attempt to alleviate this, 25% of black children were born out of wedlock. Now it's 75%. And that's one of the biggest statistics that you can see guaranteeing someone's quality of life. So again, like one of the to the questioner, what in many metrics, since we've had specific policies said to fight things like systemic racism, things have gotten worse. And it's insanity to say that we should keep doing the same thing. That's why I say one of the forms of systemic racism are things like teachers unions and the people that give this bigotry of low expectations, that encourage this victimhood culture, which is one of the worst things that we could do to solve these disparities.
But if you think that Democrats are coming up with worse policies for systemic racism to fix it, but you agree that some parts of it exist, then like my initial point, I feel as though you guys agreed with almost everything that I said and that we were on the same page for the most part. So like I feel as though like when it comes to solutions, this is something that should be pushed and something that should be accepted widely on the right so that you would have a different type of solution.
If I can real quick. If I could, like, so just because I agree that there are significant problems in a multitude of demographics in this country, and certainly blacks and inner city blacks, there's certainly a litany of problems. And it's ridiculous that our government has done such a poor job of solving them. That doesn't prove that those problems are because of systemic racism. I ran for Congress as a Republican, and I volunteered for Trump's campaign. I volunteered for Republicans. One of the first things I asked the people at the state and national level of the Republican Party that I was able to talk to was, what are we doing as Republicans to reach out to demographics that traditionally don't vote Republican, such as black Americans? And you know what they told me? We go after low-hanging fruit. Keep calling old white ladies, right? And my articulation is Republicans and right-wingers ought to understand that they will not reach people of color if they don't take the step to go out and reach out to them. My message to people of color and all people in this country is we judge you based on the content of your character. We're not going to focus on sins of the past. We're going to do our best to be race neutral as a government and society from here on forward. And if we do this for several generations, we will probably see that a lot of these communities end up doing far more successfully. The Democratic message is, no, we focus hyper-specific on race, and we want these radical changes in an effort to combat systemic racism.
Do you think there's any possibility at all that maybe the fact that black people are way more likely to live in areas of concentrated poverty in urban environments, do you think that has anything to do with actions of the past?
It could.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It could?
No,
sure.
It does.
I don't know that it exclusively does, but certainly that's a factor.
Yeah.
Do you think it's the biggest factor? Why black people specifically? More so than other?
Maybe. I think it may be indicative of one of the largest contributing factors for sure.
So why would that not be considered systemic racism?
Well, because the ramifications of such a thing doesn't mean that the institutions exist as being racist right this second.
That doesn't.
No, hold on. That's why I started off the conversation by saying that, like, the word systemic racism is what's leading people astray in the first part. Like, you guys are agreeing to the problem and how it happened, and then saying, but that's not systemic racism. But like within the definition, it is. It's the name that's the problem, but the definition fits.
You would have to move over a lot of things here. While I can agree that poverty for any demographic is a huge indicator for things like success in life, crime, things like that, I can maybe agree that blacks are disproportionately affected by that due to poverty, right? But that doesn't mean I would necessarily tailor legislation that would only help the blacks with poverty.
Do you think that a poor person cannot make it out of poverty?
What's that?
Do you think that a poor person cannot? It's impossible for a poor person to make it out of poverty.
No.
So do you think it's a bigotry of low expectation to say that we need to help poor people?
That has
Not
those two
necessarily.
questions have nothing to do, right? That's actually
But
the
there's a
inverse
direct
question that you should be
parallel. No,
asking
there's a
because
direct
it's people.
parallel there.
It's not a bigotry of low expectations to say we're trying to help people get out of poverty. Your first question says even without help, people could lift out of poverty. Okay, and then you say, so shouldn't we try to help people get out of poverty? And that's not a bigotry of low expectation. It's completely non sequitur to the first question. And the problem is the ways in which we do that. Of course, we don't have a problem. I don't think me or Big Papa Fascist, either of us said that we might have disagreements on what these policies look like, but we do not have a problem with our government helping people based on need, like economic need. We have a problem when those policies tend to be focused on immutable characteristics like race.
But you
No,
did
it-
no, you
so
did
all- yeah,
agree
all of our-
that you would accept that if systemic racism existed, that you would be okay with the government targeting the same people that were.
No, I misunderstood apparently what you were saying. I thought you were saying if we prove that this law is systemically racist, should we get rid of that law? Yes. I do not think the way you characterize it. I think it's actually the definition of racism what you're calling for, which is to say if we prove that housing discrimination was racist against blacks, shouldn't we do the inverse and have housing discrimination against whites? No, that's a terrible idea.
I mean, I agree. Like, if you want to use a shallow definition of racism, then fine, it's racist. But I'm more worried about like what the outcomes of it is and whether or not there are negative outcomes based on race. And I don't think it's actually going to hurt white people to do that, whereas like it will help black people. So
yes, it will to actively consciously discriminate against white people in things like housing would in fact hurt white people and this country.
Do you think that poverty?
You would argue that in reverse. I guarantee it.
Do you think that poverty is homogenous? All poverty is the same.
No.
Do you think that maybe in individual areas we should look at the history of what caused the poverty in this area to build a better solution?
I don't think that it really applies most of the time. If we're talking about the history, like
No,
10, 15
you just
years
agreed.
ago,
That's contradictory. If you say that poverty
it's not contradictory. If it's contradictory, why would you
have a
ask me?
single solution?
No, of course. So we could look
then
at.
let me ask you a question. If you're correct in your assertion, right? Would you say that there's a different contributing factor to poverty with the black community and poverty in Appalachia?
Poverty in Appalachia versus inner city poverty?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
but in Appalachia, there's very little crime committed by the people there who are in abject
Why?
poverty.
Yeah, because the reason for that is concentrated poverty. If you want to commit a crime in Appalachia, you have to drive 20 minutes. Like, it's a day.
not
You
true.
have to make a day out of it. It's a little bit of hyperbole, but
I agree with your central thesis here. I do. It's high levels of poverty with high population density. Right. I agree with that. But listen,
I wasn't done.
Okay, sorry.
So in Appalachia, yeah, we have to consider the history of Appalachia and why there's areas of concentrated poverty here. Maybe race is a factor in certain towns. Maybe race is a factor in certain areas. And if so, it doesn't have to be the most important thing, but it ought to be considered. But I think it's inarguable that race is going to be a contributing factor in inner city. And we see that in the biases. Biases do not exist in the past and carry through to the future. Sometimes they are post hoc. Sometimes they are the result of system justification. Sometimes people don't see the history that existed that led black people to be in these areas of concentrated poverty. Sometimes they only see, well, black people right now descriptively are in areas of concentrated poverty. I'm going to form my opinions of black people from that. It's so, yeah, there are idiot liberals out there who like, no, all black people are racist.
My point was that if we're looking at poor people in Appalachia and you ascribed a bunch of shit to it that I wasn't ascribing to it, are we to then go back in history also and look at everything that led to their poverty so that we can make a prescription, some type of welfare prescription for them? That's my point.
To the extent that it helps us understand why people are in poverty and to what extent like that thing is still there now. Absolutely.
No, I'm asking prescription wise, right? Would the prescription be that if you were to say that blacks are in poverty in the inner cities due to whatever the historical value structure was that you came up with, this is why, and so therefore they need special help that this other group doesn't get, would you apply those same standards to the poor people in Appalachia, go over their whole history, find out why they're there? Or let's say areas that were heavily Confederate, for instance, that are still feeling the effects of carpetbaggery, would you be in favor of going over all of those systems to make sure that those people who are in poverty due to that would somehow be compensated for that accordingly?
Yeah, no, wait. Wait, you just added in a new word at the very, very end, compensated. Like, no, I think that understanding the history for like why an area is in poverty is vital. Appalachia, let's say Eastern Kentucky, where I grew up, this is unique poverty. It's because of a very, very historical and targeted things. If you want to address poverty in this specific area, maybe welfare is enough, maybe that's not good enough. Maybe it's the fact that there's like no jobs because it was an area that.
Would you write prescriptions for the people in Appalachia that would be that would be
unique to those people in Appalachia?
That would be disproportionate to other people who were there based on maybe them being discriminated against historically, let's say on their skin color.
So
I'm sorry. Well, first, if you say Appalachia again, that is the most offensive thing you said this far. It's Appalachia. Sorry, that was a joke. And as in terms of like all I said, and you can repeat the question because I was thinking of that joke in my head.
Man.
Can I just say real quick, just to jump in, just real quick,
like you can lead a horse to water, man. You can lead a horse to water.
Okay, just real quick. What we can say is, like, I don't disagree that we should look at the historical factors that led to poverty, but it's certainly not where the bulk of our focus should be, and that's the reality of what happens. Yeah, we could look, for example, Lordstown in Ohio had a big I think it was GM factory. The GM factory went out of business. Now there's poverty in that area. Sure, it would make sense to look back 10 years and say, oh yeah, the poverty is because this business left.
Okay,
and we can even go back. Please. So we could go back further than that if we want. But the problem is that's where we spend the bulk of our focus. It doesn't matter why, like in the grand scheme of things, right? Like the solutions to poverty are going to be solutions to poverty, and it's going to be very similar in most areas. How far back are we going to go? Are we going to go back and look at, like, for example, Big Papa Fascist? You said you're German or
Irish.
Irish. You're Irish. Are we going to go back to the potato famine? Are we going to go back and say, oh, we're going the whole way to the potato famine to understand why Big Papa and we have to go back centuries to find out why Big Papa Fascist is in the economic position that he's in today, and that's the sort of insanity that we see. So instead, our focus should be more. Please.
I'm asking you
don't understand. Please, let me finish. So I think that the massive problem is we continue to see that we have all these red herrings that are focused on resolving sins of the past, which end up to have all these bad things that end up making the situation worse, like defund the police. Not saying you're suggesting that, but people are suggesting that in positions of power, when in reality, we should be doing things to solve poverty as opposed to looking at sins that occurred to
What's the thing? Give me the solution. I'm holding you the same standard. What is the solution for poverty? And there better be one, because if you give me something small, that's a micro solution.
I'll give you the exact solution. I'll give you the exact solution to poverty. If you look at the poverty line right now, you'll notice that every single year, more people are lifted out of it. And this is done via a market solution. And for the last 4 years under Trump, you'll notice that there was significant gains in people coming out of the poverty line, especially Black people. The solution to poverty is supply, demand side economics. Tariffs are helpful. These are the things that are actually going to bring jobs to people and actually lift them out of poverty. That's the actual solution. I can prove that by giving you the poverty line in the United States and showing you how much it's decreased in the last 30 years, but especially under Trump for the poorest Americans.
It has. It did decrease. Like poverty did decrease under Trump at the same rate that it did under Obama.
So what?
But is that average good enough? What happens?
So now it has to be better. Well, yes, it is good enough, and I'll explain to you how it's good. Hang on. I'll explain to you how it's good enough. It's good enough because if it continues to accelerate at the same rate, right, within a few decades, there won't be anybody underneath it.
All right.
And also, real quick, I would add policies that encourage family units. That's the best thing we could do to alleviate poverty. Okay. And that stop encouraging single families.
Okay, really quick. Okay, so we have a lot of questions, so we can't go this long after each one. Okay. So we'll pull up some of these. So from Aftershock for Tom, are you okay with racism towards whites to fix racism in the past?
Yeah, it depends. Like if that racism is still affecting somebody today, like I said earlier, if I take $5 from somebody because they were Black, then yeah, I think I should give the money back to the people based on the fact that they are Black. If
you're insane, that's insane.
That's racism.
Okay, fine. That's a very shallow definition of racism. I care about whether or not the effects are negative, and if you are helping a group of people, then the effects are positive for them. Choosing to not help the other group of people does not mean that the effects are negative. Now, you can have positive effects for one group of people. The effects are not negative for somebody else. This is how I would judge what is or isn't racist, is whether or not they have detrimental effects to somebody. I judge people based on race all the time. I judge them based on sex all the time. I judge people based on hair color all of the time, and I don't give a crap, and I will continue doing those things because there's nothing wrong with it.
But that's in practice retarded. Like, it's in practice retarded.
I think you would have to be very shallow to think that. Like, what matters is the outcome, not just whether or not you judge.
What matters is the outcome, eh?
This is insane. You can't be racist to solve racism.
You guys are calling it racist. I wouldn't call it racist.
The question literally says, are you okay with racism towards whites to fix racism in the past? You say yes.
White people think that other people getting stuff is racism against white people.
That's not true. I gave a specific example.
It is. Objectively, it's true.
I didn't
That's not what your partner said.
White people think that black people are getting more benefit or they're like improving their place in society. They view it as a zero-sum game. That white people
Let me ask you this. If black people see a policy as benefiting white people and they think it benefits white people more, do they view it as bad?
No.
That's just a flat out lie.
That's a flat out lie.
You're just lying. Yes, you're absolutely lying.
No,
so you're saying that if there was real quick, you're saying that if Donald Trump was in office and he had a policy that said, I don't know, we're going to give tax cuts, and people said that'll disproportionately help white people, the black community was like, fantastic. We like when white people are disproportionately helped. You think that's what the majority of black people?
No, we encourage policies that disproportionately affect white people as being against them. So black people do not view policies that disproportionately affect white people, that disproportionately benefit black people as being against white people, but white people sure do. White people.
I asked. That's not the question I asked. If you would stop being hyperbolic, if you would hear. I said if there is a policy. Again, let me repeat the question. If there is a policy that black people, if there is a, excuse me, please. He's not going to answer. Whatever. Just move on.
All right.
Hold on. I just want to clarify. I did not say yes to that question. I gave an example.
That was the first
no,
word
I
out of your
did
mouth.
not. I said I gave an example, and I said if this is what you consider racism, then yes. But if I don't consider that racist,
The first word out of your mouth was yes.
All
Just so
right.
you know.
All right, so we are moving on. Okay, and then thank you, Alex, for the super chat. There was nothing really said there. Okay, so from Eric Pone, how about a class-based solution like manufactured homes in poor, dense communities? Clearly, none of the debaters seem to understand Black people.
Hey, sure.
I love Black people.
Again, the problem is the problem is that people just want to say, and this is kind of a separate debate from what we're talking about, but they just want to say, well, if we just did this sort of welfare policy, or if we just infused money in this way, everyone would agree that's a good idea. That's not true. Like, for example, you might disagree with this person, but you go back and look at Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman famously said he did not see one welfare policy that was designed to help a specific subset of people that actually didn't make those people's lives worse. So he actually talked about HUD housing and things like that, and how it was actually detrimental to inner city Black communities.
Hey, Rob, what if we made large structures that low income people could then move into, and they would be low income for everybody? And I'm sure that would work out great. What do we call those now?
There's a word, right?
What is that word? I can't. It's like on the tip of my tongue.
Would it be better if they were homeless?
No one's saying that.
No one's saying that. We're saying that we've applied that solution and we saw the result, didn't we?
Wait, is that real?
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Thank you so much for that. It's so generous, Dex. Really appreciate it. Okay, can we please move on now, guys? All right.
Yeah. 5 minutes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fucking heck. We have a lot of questions.
I'll push through.
All right. So from CD SOCDEM for BPF, in your definition of implicit bias, is it exclusively unconscious thoughts?
Yeah, roughly. I mean, that's roughly how it's described. There may be more, because liberals nuance the shit out of everything. There may be nuance. There may be some fucking nuance in there that I don't quite latch onto. But basically, yes. Unconscious bias is basically things that you're doing that you're not even aware of unconsciously. Yes.
Okay. From Kel, Why would a company hire blacks? Oh, what is that noise? Why would a company hire blacks over whites when our political society allows blacks to accuse them of racism while whites can't and are less of a political time bomb?
Some people view, I'll tell you, I understand the question and it's more directed towards Tom and Jangles, but some people view the risk of that is outweighed by the ability to virtue signal to their diversity.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. What the fuck?
Why would a company hire blacks over whites when our political society allows blacks to accuse them of racism while whites can't and are less of a political time bomb?
Is that
I don't know what one
we
has
have
to do
to be
with the
racist to black people because they're going to accuse us of racism? Is that what that was asking?
Yeah, I don't know what that one has to do with the
It's the Jordan Peterson, like, you can't hire women because then they'll accuse you of like being sexist against women. But okay, that was wonderful.
I don't think that the questioner is saying it's a good thing.
No.
I don't think that. Tom Fuller even admitted, I judge people based on race. I judge people based on, right? So like there is human nature, right? And if you're afraid, if you got to choose between two people and you say, I think if I hire that person, I won't have any problems. I could talk how I want at work. But if I hire that person, I have to walk on eggshells or there could be
so
a
racism is more than just abject like vengeance and like hatred against a group of people.
Sure.
Right? It could just be like some sort of bias, some sort of like bias that is not like at the forefront of your mind, but just built in via scripts.
Well, that would be conscious. That would be conscious bias that
No. Via scripts and status quos and things that you assume about the world just based on your own experiences, and you might not consciously think about them. I
just gave the rationale. I just told you that that's conscious bias. If I consciously said, I'm considering hiring this person versus this one, that is conscious bias. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that that's reality.
What if that's just in the back of their mind? What if that's just an assumption that they're making?
Right, and prove it.
Sorry.
Can we move on?
Yeah.
So from Yoga, for Rob Noerr, what is your position on race and IQ?
I think that that's very dangerous. I think that, first off, it's dangerous to even talk about because bigots want to take anyone who was talking about this in good faith and make arguments that people are inferior. I do think that there is good evidence that there are racial differences in IQ. However, I think that there's probably a lot of environmental factors that goes into IQ, right? For example, if you are systemically poor and your family's been poor for 3 generations, or if your family hasn't had education opportunities in the past, then it could result in a lowering of your IQ. I choose to judge people as individuals, not as groups. So I don't even care about the racial IQ argument in the first place. But it's dangerous to talk about because the reason that it would be important is because you're saying some people are born more intelligent than other people. But if there are environmental factors that led to the way they were born doing that, then the entire conversation just seems worthless anyways.
Based. Nice. Good answer.
All right. So from Tuss Beatbox, for Rob, what would be some rich sounding black names, considering there are white names that are associated with better socioeconomic status?
I don't think that there's a white name that's a rich sounding white name. We have pretentious sounding white names.
Alexander.
Yeah,
you can't do the study in the inverse. That's like kind of the point.
That's not true because the point is we're not talking about rich sounding names. We're talking about poor sounding names, and there certainly are poor sounding white names, right? And the problem is it's not even a question. Again, with this study, it's not even a question of does the name sound poor or what. It's class more than poor. And when I say class, I don't mean economic class. I mean class like I like to drink my tea with my pinky up versus this some bitch is riding 4-wheelers on the weekend, shotgun in Milwaukee Best Lights, right? Like that's what I'm talking about with class.
And the fact that they control for socioeconomic class, you just flat out refused, despite the fact that it was in the
but they said they did, but they didn't do the inverse. Again, how would you? So let me talk about how this
guys, we're going circular. We've got to move on to the questions. We have to.
All right. So who did we just lose? Somebody. Oh, Rob. Okay, I'll be back. All right, so from the Hammerite for Jangles, speaking of hiring by name, how many blacks in USA have pure black names?
Have pure black names? I don't know what a pure black name is. There's no such thing as a pure black name. It's all about perception and association, which is what that study measured. And I'm sorry, I just had to, like, what does it mean to be racist? Like,
yeah.
What
Seriously.
about, how can you be racist, but in a way that doesn't associate like negative class to that group of people? There are ways, but I'm just wondering, no, it's not that I hate black people. I just hate poor people, and I think black people are poor people.
Right.
That's not what this study. Your fundamental misunderstanding of what I'm. I don't understand. You are misunderstanding the fundamental argument, which CPF seems to understand. I'll just say it real quick. 30 seconds. I'll say it, right? The argument is this. It doesn't control for the variable that the reason these people might not be getting called back could have to do with they have different or strange sounding names rather than they have black sounding names.
The problem with that argument is the problem with that argument is you make an infinite regress no matter how it's phrased, right? I hate poor people, therefore I hate poor people, therefore I hate poor people, therefore I hate poor people. You add one more. I hate poor people, and poor people are black, therefore I hate poor people because they're black. Add one more variable. It just continues and continues and continues.
It's a misunderstanding of what racism is. Like,
in the words of Joe Biden,
people don't hate any sort of like group of people based on like if they have this one characteristic. It's because that characteristic is indicative of. It's because that characteristic is indicative of other traits that they don't like.
That's not true.
So, no.
You can't prove it's true.
Hold on, Jangles. We're not.
If you
Hold
ask
on,
a
Jangles.
racist why they hate black people, they'll give you reasons.
Jangles,
but you just
beyond just being black.
You just said to me, Jangles, that you can't hate a person defined by one characteristic, and that's a lie. You can't.
Hold on, no, it's because what you associate with that characteristic, what that identity is, all right? You don't hate X people because X. It's because X is associated with Y.
No, that's not always true. I can literally blow that out of the water. I can simply hate you because you have brown eyes.
Really?
Yes.
Not because you associate brown eyes.
It doesn't matter what the association may be.
It does,
maybe
because
there is
why would you hate someone with brown eyes if it was just like...
There may not even be an association. I can just simply hate you because you have brown eyes for no other reason than that. There's no logical penalty to do that.
It is hilarious to me. Like, I just realized why this conversation has been so cancerous. Like, you do not understand what racism is. Like, racism is you have to hate black people because they are black, not because you associate other things with blackness.
But when you say you have to hate based on characteristics that are associated with others, that's a lie.
No.
Yes.
Do you hate?
It's literally an outright lie. It's totally infactual. It's totally nonsensical.
It's totally. You are flailing when you were trying to say.
I just want to say that I can sum up the problem that people are having with my characterization of this study. In the words of Joe Biden, poor people could be just as smart as white people. That's literally what the mistake you all are making here.
That proves my point.
It proves our point.
It doesn't. That's literally.
Look, he associated poor with black.
Yes, that's the point.
Right, poor with black.
Right, that's what you're doing. That's what you keep doing. You keep saying that, just because they didn't want to call people back because they might have thought that they were lower class, that proves they didn't want to call them back because they're black. No, it could be just because they thought they were lower class. That could be what it is.
Rob, that's true. Rob,
that is exactly.
I'm gonna move on.
Gotta have to go so soon, please.
All right, let me see if I can get the ones that are just for you then. All right, so from unrelated coma to Jangles, what flavor is your Red Bull that you're drinking?
What flavor is my Red Bull? Now,
crack flavored.
I wasn't drinking Red Bull. I was drinking a classy drink called Milwaukee's Best Light. Okay, it's $4 for a 6-pack because I do have that class that we've been talking about.
All right, I will give Jangles this. Milwaukee's not terrible.
Milwaukee tries its best.
It does its best.
All right, so from Aftershock to Jangles. You gave percentages of discrepancies with your studies. What percentage would not be racism? A perfect 50-50? Just curious.
That's like Loki's wager, right? Like, at what percentage does it become racism? Racism is a binary. It isn't an on and off switch. It's usually like a spectrum of like racism technically exists, but it's not a super big deal. Like, it's just gonna happen versus like explicit KKK style racism. It's a weird question. Like, it's like at what like. When I say Loki's wager, it's like if I'm gonna cut your head off and I can't, like, is this TOS? It's a metaphor. But like if I want to cut your head off, but I can't touch your neck whatsoever, like where does your head begin and neck? It's like it's a what is it? Continuum fallacy, if you want to be pretentious. But the answer is like I don't know. It would depend on a lot of different factors. I don't think it's a hard line, and I don't think that's like indicative that you can't do a thing, right?
All right. So from Aftershock for Jangles. Biden implemented money to only poor black farmers and left out poor whites. Is Biden racist? Then can you point to something as racist and as detailed from Trump?
I would have to read what the article said. It's the only thing I saw is like the Washington Post, and I can see the first thing. Like $5 billion would go to farmers of color who have lost 90% of their land over the past century because of systemic discrimination. Like, if this is not hurting white people, if it's only helping black people, who we can like show like there's a direct through line between like why these people are hurting, like, I don't think helping people who need help is the same as harming people who don't. So I would have to know more about it before I made a decision on that.
That's just absurd. And let me explain why. Like,
No,
let's say that we had enough money to give 100 of the poorest farmers in this country money, right? And it turned out that 98 of those farmers were black and 2 of them were white. Then we would give those 100 farmers the money. But if we said we're just going to give it to black people, we would give those 98 black farmers. And then instead of the 2 white people that were in this, we would find 2 other black farmers that don't meet that criteria that would have been met in the first policy and help them. So those 2 white farmers are directly right. Like, that's why. And again, what we see is these actual policies are being suggested and implemented over and over, as I talked about some of them. And that is example of systemic racism. It meets the definition. It is our system that is judging people and giving people based on their race. We even see in California, they repealed the law that said that the government could not favor or prioritize or discriminate against race. Democrats repealed that law in California. And this is actual. We don't need studies to prove this is racist. It's literally racist. If the inverse was true, if we had a policy, if Joe Biden said, we're going to give only poor white farmers money, everyone in this panel would say that's racist. But when we do it with black, we're like, well, there could be a reason for it. It's still racist.
This is the classic conversation. Like, if you take
enough,
money from black people because
for somebody who wants to go, has to go soon.
This is why I want to go.
Okay, I get it.
All right, so from Mio, why is Rob the only one with his white boy summer shirt on?
Oh, man.
Okay.
Tom's got the same shirt. I know he does. I've seen a picture.
All right, so from Aftershock for BPF, can you call yourself a conservative if you voted for Biden? Want to fuck with Tom?
No. Not only can you not call yourself a conservative, but you have done a horribly dishonest horrid thing to your country, I would say. But most certainly you're not a conservative. Absolutely not.
Okay. From Vexner says, have right versus far right, please, on Politically Revoked. Think that would be an interesting dynamic. We have done that, and we probably will be doing some more of that. So, from Mio, Jangles, Tom, what kind of names are most likely to be buck broken?
Huh? Buck broken?
I don't know.
Was that like a typo for black?
I don't know. I don't think so. From Aftershock for Jangles, just to own the righties here, how exactly did your study account for class?
Study account for class? Oh, fuck. Okay.
I asked him that 30 times and he couldn't answer it.
You vaguely alluded to it once.
No.
Let's see.
It's on my clipboard of things I asked multiple times.
How did it account for class? Oh, fuck.
I can move on to the next question when we find it.
Yeah, can I come back to that when I find it?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so from George Mountain, if black people are more likely to have an open arrest warrants, wouldn't it make sense that they were pulled over more often when you see in a vehicle?
Well, that's still, let me kind of agree with, I think, what Jangles and Tom would say. That still is bias, right? It's just maybe the bias is legitimate, but it would still be an example of bias. And if I was black, I would still be pissed about that, particularly if I didn't break the law and I got pulled over because the cops like, traditionally black people have more arrest warrants, so I'm going to pull them over. Like, I would still be pissed about that. But the truth is, and with these studies, and this is why I think Jangles is right to bring up this Veil of Sunset study, that's at least trying to eliminate other variables. Many of the other studies that he's talking about, there's all sorts of problems with. For example, it doesn't, all these studies don't take into account prior history. It doesn't take into account that we see that black judges and black jurists tend to give harsher penalties for all people that they see. So there's all sorts of problems that we see with these sort of studies. There could be other variables that lead to the increased sentencing.
And I have to kind of caveat. And
well, it's very, very important in studies, just because there could be other variables. This is not an argument that those variables are like likely. All right, like this is a limit. All you are doing when you say that is what the researchers are doing. You're saying that this is a limitation of the study. You are not providing evidence that the interpretations are incorrect. You're like, that's quick conflating.
The onus is on the people claiming that they've proven systemic racism to prove it. Right?
No, that's yes. You do not prove things objectively in hard sciences like physics. At the hardest levels of science, you say this is the best evidence based on what we have available and the limitations of our equipment. All right. So that's what I'm saying. That's why I don't understand. Like,
I want to clarify,
other variables could exist. Of course.
I want to clarify a position here. Well, I do think that you can have policy that is racist I think that you can also have policy that was fundamentally not designed to be racist, but can intersect with things that can be perceived as racist. For instance, I'm a big fan of stop and frisk, right? But I understand that stop and frisk is also going to be deployed mostly where the crime is, which is going to be in low-income areas. I don't think that stop and frisk inherently is racist, but I think that you're most likely going to shake down a lot more black people than white people, depending on where those demographics are. If you had stop and frisk in poor Appalachia, it's going to be pretty much all white people. If you had it in inner cities,
Well, that's why
that's
we
going to be a
kept-
different
curious.
story.
That's why
I'm
we kept
curious, do you think-
separating the outcome versus the intent.
I'm curious, do you think that there might be possible racial intent, like by deciding that based on how you look and dress and just your guts, that police officers should be able to like pull over people and like interfere with their rights?
I think that
there could be some problems with making that a policy.
that there could be, but you would have to prove that based on the policy and how it was enforced. Now, the thing is that if you're looking at people who are in largely a black community that's riddled with a lot of crime, right? Of course, stop and frisk is going to look on the surface like a very racist policy because there's just simply a lot more black people there that you would have to stop and frisk. So
And real quick,
correlation's not causation.
And real quick, just to piggyback off this, I find it funny that we have all this focus on groups that we consider oppressed with this, but by far the biggest group to get stopped with stop and frisk is going to be men. And then probably the next factor would be younger people. You're not pulling over like
Super
really
weird that we're focusing on that on a like in a debate about systemic racism. Why aren't we
Right, but the
focusing on
problem is,
men?
again, Jangles,
Well, no,
just like you wanted to focus, Jangles, real quick.
Intersectionality is important. I need to ask
please,
that. Is
please.
intersectionality
No, I
important?
think intersectionality is another form of cultural Marxism, like
But you're
critical
doing it
race
right
theory that
now.
used to divide us.
No, you're saying like we're only focusing on race
I'm not
without-
doing critical race theory. But again, Jangles, I know you
critical
need to
race
talk over
theory.
me. I know you need to talk over me because you desperately need to sound like you're right when you're wrong. But
I
the
am
point is
so
this:
correct about
again,
everything.
just like when you wanted to talk about how all of these whites are against welfare programs if they perceive it going to black, those people aren't in this debate. What I'm talking about is the movement in this country that wants to hyper focus on race, particularly hyper focus on race when talking about law enforcement, when every metric shows that men, by the way, the intersectionalists and feminists that agree, again, look at the coalition that is Black Lives Matter. Like, we could lie about it all we want, but we know what it is. It is intersectional. It is this cultural Marxism of blacks, feminists, trans, gays, all of these groups that consider themselves oppressors are oppressed, and yet the biggest group that's being oppressed by these same metrics by law enforcement are men. And no one gives a shit. There's no national movement. No one's saying that the country's systemically bigoted. No one's having 1619 projects talking about law enforcement screwing over men. No one's talking about the need to teach kids in school how law enforcement harms men. We know that's the truth. We could deny it, but we know that's the truth.
Okay, can we
it's
move
the
on?
truth.
All right, so from Crazy Hole, ask Tom and Jangles if they read an article that said John Smith killed 20 people, would they assume John was white or black?
I wouldn't.
The first thing that comes to my head, John Smith. Well, I don't know. First thing I see is I'm white. I'm familiar with white people. Probably picture him as white.
Yeah, we're saying that there aren't names that are specifically white because black people are part of like American culture. They're going to take on a lot of names that are part of American culture, but white people aren't normally part of black culture, so they're almost never going to take on names that are part of black culture. So you can look at a name. So you can look at a name that is like is almost 100% of the time going to be a black person, whereas other names could be either or.
So
Yeah, if you're talking about the national conversation in like media and like movies and stuff like that, there needs to be a reason for a main character not to be white or not to be male.
Okay, do you think that
anything
maybe
that
then-
includes those are like considered woke nowadays? And actually, like not nowadays, always. So like, yeah, white is considered default.
So Tom, do you think then, as often women who are, they have sex crimes committed against them, when they release those sex crimes, they call them a Jane Doe? Are you aware of that? Do you think that we should change that so that, the first thing that you don't think of is a white person?
What is the effect of this?
I'm just asking because that's what the question was essentially asking. It's like, what would you think? What would you think on that? Would you instantly just assume that that's a white person?
Well, so I'm okay with there being names that are specifically white and names that are specifically black. I'm okay with people assuming that somebody is white or black based on their name. The problem is the outcome of these things. So if people aren't getting jobs because they have a name that sounds black, then that is the problem, not the fact that people have different sounding names.
All right, so we have like 5 more questions. How long that takes is up to you guys, okay? All right, so from Aftershock for Tom, since you said systemic racism is anything that negatively affects Black people, would it be systemic racism when Democrats pushed for $400 plus gun insurance to own a gun?
Maybe I said that anything that negatively affects them based on or coming from a system. I would say that Black people disproportionately probably, or maybe not disproportionately, but I know a lot of Black people own guns. It's common in Black culture. I would say probably, but I think that like the solutions to this is definitely going to be something that's going to help white people and Black people. And
But just real quick, it's not about owning guns. It's about the prohibitive cost. And you would agree that blacks are disproportionately poor. So if we have incredible cost added to owning a gun, then it would disproportionately affect black people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So that would be racist. So it'd be a racist law to have that.
I suppose that would. I would have to look more into this, but like based on the framing,
some leftists do make that argument.
All right, so from Low End Theory, certain Black names are associated with being lower class, according to Rob. Is it racist to assume traditionally Black names are lower class? If you disagree, why not?
Again, people are conflating the idea. There are certain white names that are conflated with lower class. Jethro, Cletus, Bubba Ray. Is it racist to assume? No, because the skin color has nothing to do with it. It's just that we assume that those names seem to be lower class. Even though those are lower class white names, we wouldn't say that that's racist to assume. We would say it might be bigoted, it might be classist, but it's not racist, right? It could be racist, but there's no proof that this is racism. This is
those names are associated with white people. Again, because those names are associated with Black people in the studies that we were talking about. That's the entire point of it.
Right, and I know we're not relitigating. I know that I know that you and other people are incapable of understanding that. What I'm saying is there is another variable that this study could be looking at. I do understand. I absolutely understand how variables. I'm not going to relitigate it. I do understand.
I know. We're not going to relitigate this.
All right, we're moving on. Okay, so from Cal, how do you feel about BLM not being in support of body cams because they hide police nature to be racist? I don't know about that. So.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, I don't either. From Crazy Hole, ask the panel if systemic racism exists in the way the media reports things, and if so, can you explain why I can name 12 notorious white people that make the news for everyone Black?
I do not know what white, like the media is. Like the media is not one thing.
You need that described to you. You don't know what the media is, Jangles.
Yes, the media is one thing. It's a homogenous thing. You were joking, right?
Describe it for me. Describe what the media is. I don't know what the media is. What's the media? Do you know? Hey, Rob, what's the media, Rob?
I've looked at media. I'm an expert on looking at media, so I just know this more than other
Fox
people.
I'm just smarter in this area. They're the same.
Look, to answer the question, the question was directed to the panel. So the question was directed to the panel. Cool. So it's this constant red herring and straw manning that you see from Jangles. Anyways, to answer the question, yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I know that Jangles wants to keep this debate to confined to sounding very reasonable. Big Papa Fascist did the best thing in this debate where he made it. He actually pointed out that like everything they're saying are just small issue things. That the solutions, even if we don't agree with the problem, we'd say shit, we're for those solutions anyways. The problem is, regardless if Jangles is doing this strategically or because he believes it, I'll assume he believes it in good faith. That's not the way people in positions of power are doing things. And we can see that there is an incredible impetus to cause division based on race in this country by people in positions of power, particularly the national media.
So to answer that question, right?
Is Fox News the national media? I want you to answer that. Is Fox News the media?
I'm not going to respond to Johnny Strawman over here. Define what media is.
Is Fox News the media? Is a strawman?
Okay, so anyway, to respond,
you know why? I wouldn't respond.
Yes, Fox News is the media. How does that have anything to do? Fox News is part of the media. The question was right. Sure. What does that prove? What point does that prove that you're?
Maybe what does that prove? You say the media, that's not homogenous. Like maybe everyone.
No one said it was homogenous. We understand when people say things. For example, if people say
Rob, Republicans, CNN don't appear on Fox News, Rob.
Right, people who isn't it funny? Isn't it funny? Real quick.
Okay,
please, Jingles, you just have to leave people respond. So, like, real quick, Jangles doesn't have a problem talking about white people are against this welfare. Are white people homogenous? No, but he talks about it because we understand what that study's saying is, in the bulk, this is what we say when we mean white people. The same is true of when the questioner asks media. Everybody knows what he's asking, but people that want to deflect from the question say, I don't understand the question. Right. What is the media? And then when we correctly make fun of you, you say, but isn't Fox News part of the media? Yes, we're not the ones who claimed to not understand what the media was. That was you. So you don't have to clarify from us. If anyone should be asking questions about what people understand the media should be, it's us asking you because you're feigning ignorance about what the questioner asked.
When you cite a study that's generalizing, it's the same thing as like, oh, is the media homogenous? Those are the same thing. Well, it is amazing to me that the conversation
define
when you cite a study, that means you're racist against white people.
Should we define every single word we speak in this debate, Jangles?
I think definition. Do you think that's not important?
I'm asking you a question. Should we define every single word, or are there going to be words that we just have a universal understanding of?
Like with the contentious words.
What is the meaning of is? It depends on what the meaning of is, right?
Oh fuck, you're right.
We have one last question. Hey guys,
we have that make you so angry.
One last question, and then and then we'll do closing statements, and then we're done. So from Bexner to Jangles, what if I told you I had 20 studies that show the average IQ of racial groups varies greatly by race? What if I had 40, 100? Also, are you alive? How do you know if no study?
I've been dead for 20 years. Inside.
Do you have a study?
I don't have a study.
Where's my data?
But I do very much appreciate that, like, the right has started to, like, just recognize that the studies never agree with them, so they just decided the studies don't matter. I'm a big fan of that.
That's not true. We talked about what we did was we ran through the studies and talked about first we granted them and showed the solution, and then when we did discuss the studies,
I know.
No, that's your opinion.
I know.
We granted my data and still kicked you over the rail.
Oh, all right. Yeah. So let's just get into closing statements.
Yeah, it was easy.
All right, so we'll go from Tom, Rob, Jangles, BPF. So closing statements.
With 2 minutes, is that? Or,
yeah.
Okay. So I feel as though I've laid out numerous examples of how systems affect different races. They either my opponents either agreed or ended up arguing my point. They agreed with systemic racism the entire time, and that it will have disproportionate effects on a community that is the minority. They know these systems inhibit the black people's ability to be successful in America, but then expect them to push through more structures and more roadblocks that will make it harder for them while still expecting them to be successful in the United States. This is bigotry of high expectations. They expect a lot more of black people than they do of anybody else. And if you accept the system, the systemic racism and the negative effect on black people and understand them, then this would be explicit racism. Once you choose to ignore racism towards a certain group, it is no longer implicit. From this conversation, I don't think the Rob and BPF understand, though I don't think that panels like this are the best way to go through this sorts of information. It gets confusing. Me and Jangles argued completely different points here, so I don't want to sound as though I'm calling them explicitly racist. Some of the points is that businesses in the past affect black people to where they're poor based on the color of their skin. This affects their culture, this affects the way that they get along in America, and this affects the way that we think of them. And so if we're able to fix some of the systems that affect them negatively, then maybe we would think of them in a better light. And a lot of the things that we do implicitly would no longer affect them negatively. So things like giving them money, helping their education, making it to where they're not disproportionately poor or disproportionately undereducated would make a big deal or a big difference in how we interact with black people in America.
Okay. All right, so Rob?
Okay, there's two separate arguments from our opponents here. Tom Foolery's argument could be dispensed with the idea that everything is systemically racist. Any unequal outcome is defined as systemic racism. It literally means the term is meaningless. That's what he said. He also suggested that he would have racist policies. He says that they're not racist, but specifically like impeding white people with housing opportunities to benefit black people is racism. This is what's suggested by many people out in the real world. That's racism. It's bad. Jangles' argument is, as Big Papa Fascist correctly points out, is to point to a bunch of micro things things with studies. What I'm doing is talking about variables in the studies that could suggest that systemic racism isn't the only reason. He's saying that those other variables don't disprove that it's systemic racism. I agree. The onus is on the people claiming systemic racism to prove it, and there is no proof positive from any of the statements he said. However, it's irrelevant anyways, because if we grant that these issues are systemically racist, then the policies that he suggests would be policies that we're in favor of anyways. And so the real reason that this is important is because of, despite what Jangles will have you believe, the real important thing is what people in positions of power are suggesting we do based on systemic racism. The way it works is this: we say redlining occurred in the past, or blacks are pulled over 9% more than white people. Therefore, we need to tear down the system. Therefore, this country is horrible. Therefore, we need to teach critical race theory. Therefore, we need to implement all of these socialist, communist policies that they want to suggest. And this is where the crux of the debate is. I agree. I think that it's great that Jangles is against this, but we can see that the policies that have done as a result of these things have been things like defunding the police, which has led to increased homicides in inner city neighborhoods. We've seen that it's led to riots, which were riots that primarily occurred in inner city neighborhoods. So that's where the focus of this debate is. Lastly, I want to say that we can see that this bigotry of low expectations is something that is making the communities worse. BPF's absolutely right when we talk about under Trump. We saw that it was accelerated the amount of people that were people of color that were being lifted out. And that's because the way to get out of this is to encourage people that they can achieve, to judge people based on the content of their character and not the color of the skin, to not judge people based on sins of the past, and to move forward as a government so that we can treat everyone as individuals that will be able to solve the problems that we're talking about.
All right. Thank you, Jangles.
I think this debate was a perfect encapsulation of the entire conservative position here. So especially Rob, a little bit BPF. I was actually surprised that BPF was very slightly more reasonable. So as they decided that the solution is bad and therefore the problem must not exist. All right, so it's this cognitive dissonance between America as a free and just place. And we believe that, but also at the same time, we acknowledge that we have fucked over enormous swaths of people based solely on their skin color, and that those people have not recovered. However, fixing that problem, fixing that vast discrepancy, fixing that like past wrong would require positive discrimination in the other direction, and that conflicts with the American ideas of freedom and equality. Now, rather than just living with this, recognizing that we fuck these people over, helping them kind of goes against our values, and living with that cognitive dissonance, a lot of conservatives work backwards to say that no, systemic racism doesn't exist. Oh, you have a study? Well, since I don't know how studies are conducted, I'm just going to decide that every other variable that could have been controlled for, that maybe was controlled for, I'm going to either pretend that those variables definitely prove that your results are wrong, or I'm just going to ignore you when you say that they were controlled for. So I'm so glad that we said that out loud, that we had to reduce it to the point where, like, black people, the fact that they're a numerical minority, that's the biggest problem. So numerical minority, that's it. Nothing more to look up there. And also think that, like, if you associate other traits with a race of people, well, then your real problem is with those traits, even though that your association with a group of people, like if you think that black people are low class, that means you can't be racist against black people. Your real problem's with low class. I think that's hilarious, and I'm glad that someone said it out loud with their mouth. So, yeah, I had a lot of fun, and I'm sleeping on the couch tonight because I was supposed to be done an hour ago. That's my problem, not yours. Okay.
Okay. Go on, Andrew.
So anyway, in closing, this is very simple. I'll just go ahead and summarize a position easily. At the outset of this, I explained that the reason that these micro issues are focused on is because all of this will really always come back to this theory of unconscious bias. And when you're trying to make these demonstrations like they're trying to do through studies, these are really very, very micro when you're talking about the macro of how systemic racism would normally be applied over the entire country. I think that if we just go ahead and grant the argument for the studies, we can see that the only solutions these guys will come up with are going to be based around unconscious bias. Almost every single time they're going to say, we need to do better training, we need to do more brainwashing, we need to do more whatever we need to do to get rid of whatever the unconscious bias is. So we get pinned down in this quagmire, in this bog of talking about shit that really doesn't even matter, because if we grant it, the solutions are exactly the same. What I would like to see in a good faith debate like this is, what do you actually want to fucking do, right? Even if it's all true, all of it, what do you want to actually do about it? And the problem that we have is that, no, like Jangles said, he's like, well, I don't fucking know what to do about it, right? I have no idea what to do about it. Now, I'm not trying to mischaracterize him, but that's basically what the guy said. So when this is all said and done, it's like this. I want to know if these are micro issues or if this is a macro problem. That was not solved tonight. I want to know these things because these are the most important fucking things to know. And that's where I'm at with everything. And guess what? Doesn't fucking do anything for anybody.
All right. Yeah, so thank you guys all for for coming on.
I disagree. That was beautiful.
I bet those glasses make you see better.